Don't fire me. Elena's voice cracked as she pressed herself against the kitchen wall, clutching a half-eaten container of leftover food, like it was something she'd stolen from a king. Please, I'll pay it back. Every cent. Adrian Moretti stood in the doorway of his own penthouse at 2 in the morning, staring at the woman who cleaned his floors 3 times a week, the woman nobody in his world had ever bothered to see. And in that single moment, the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Shame. If this story already has your attention, hit that subscribe button, drop your city in the comments below, and stay with me until the very end. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The security alert came in at 1:43 in the morning. A single vibration. A small red icon on Adrian Moretti's phone screen. Motion detected. Private residence. Penthouse level. Adrian was sitting in the back of his armored car, 40 minutes from the city, returning from a meeting that had lasted 6 hours longer than it should have. His jaw was tight. His collar was open. His right hand still had the faint sting of a handshake that had been more threat than greeting. He almost ignored the alert. He had people for that. He had a security team, a building supervisor, a rotating set of guards whose entire job was to make sure nothing happened inside his private spaces without his knowledge or permission. But something made him open the feed. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the particular kind of exhaustion that makes a man suspicious of everything, including silence. Maybe it was simply that Adrian Moretti had survived this long by never dismissing the small things. He opened the app, he tapped the kitchen camera, and he stopped breathing. She was sitting on his kitchen floor, not standing, not searching through drawers, not rifling through cabinets or checking corners the way a thief would. She was sitting on the tile with her back against the lower cabinet, knees drawn up, holding a small plastic container of leftover food that Adrian recognized vaguely as something his chef had prepared 2 days ago and left in the refrigerator. Elena Vargas, his maid. The woman who came 3 mornings a week, cleaned without being asked. Twice, never broke anything, never complained, and was so thoroughly unremarkable in his world that Adrian genuinely could not have told you an hour ago what color her eyes were. She wasn't stealing. She was eating. Quietly. Slowly. The way someone eats when they're so hungry, they're almost past the point of feeling it, and they're trying not to think about how hungry they actually are. Her phone was on the floor beside her screen, uplit with a thread of text messages Adrian couldn't read from the camera angle. Whatever she was reading, her shoulders were curling forward like the words had weight. Then she set the container down, pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth. And Adrian watched Elena Vargas try very hard not to cry on his kitchen floor at 2 in the morning. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he told his driver to turn around. His head of security. Marco was in the front seat. Marco had been with Adrian for 11 years. He had seen things that would make ordinary men permanently unable to sleep. He was not a man who startled easily. But when Adrian said, "Take me home," now, something in his voice made Marco glance in the rearview mirror. "Everything all right, boss?" "Drive, Marco." Marco drove. Adrian did not look at the phone feed again. He didn't need to. The image was already doing something uncomfortable inside his chest, pressing against old walls, finding the thin places in the mortar, the hairline cracks that a man accumulates after 40 years of living. A life built entirely on the requirement that he feel nothing inconvenient. He looked out the window instead. The city slid past him like it always did. Lights. Motion. People living their lives in windows he would never look inside. Adrian had built his empire in this city. He had made himself into something this city feared and respected in equal ugly measure. He controlled things here. Flows of money, lines of influence, the invisible architecture of power that ordinary people walked through every day without knowing it existed. He had never once sat on anyone's kitchen floor. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer. Adrian stepped out alone. He had told Marco to wait downstairs. He had given no explanation, and Marco, to his credit, had asked for none. The apartment was quiet. He moved through it without turning on lights. When he reached the kitchen doorway, he stopped. Elena was on her feet. She had heard the elevator. She was standing with the container clutched against her chest, her back to the counter, and the expression on her face was the specific expression of someone who has been caught doing something that isn't wrong but feels worse than if it were. Pure cornered terror. "Mr. Moretti." Her voice was barely sound. I can explain." "Sit down." She blinked. "I'm so sorry. I know I shouldn't be here. I didn't take anything. I swear it was going to be thrown out. I asked Mrs. Reyes last week if the leftovers ever got." "Elena." His voice was flat, controlled. The voice he used in rooms full of dangerous men when he needed everyone to be very still. "Sit down." She sat. She chose the chair at the far end of the kitchen island, the one farthest from him, and she set the container on the surface in front of her, like an offering or an exhibit, and she folded her hands, and she looked at the counter, and she waited. Adrian pulled out the chair directly across from her and sat down. He looked at her, really looked for the first time the way you only look at someone when all the noise of ordinary life has dropped away, and there's nothing left between you and the truth of another person's face. Elena Vargas was, he realized now, with a kind of delayed recognition that felt almost like embarrassment, not the invisible shape he had registered for the past year and a half. She was a woman in her early 30s with dark hair pulled back in a way that had mostly come loose over what was clearly an extraordinarily long day. She had high cheekbones and tired eyes, and hands that were resting flat on his counter, and where he noticed now, marked with the kind of small scars and roughness that come from years of physical work. She was exhausted, not tired. Exhausted. The deep kind, the kind that lives in the bones and doesn't go away with a single night of sleep. "When did you last eat a real meal?" he asked. She looked up. That was not the question she had expected. That's not..." She stopped, regrouped. "I eat." "When?" "This morning. I had..." She stopped again. Her jaw shifted slightly the way it does when someone is deciding how much truth to let into the room. "I had coffee." "That's not a meal." "I know what a meal is, Mr. Moretti." There was a flash of something in her eyes when she said it. Not disrespect. Something closer to dignity, refusing to lie down, even under the circumstances. Adrian found that he did not want to look away from it. "How long have you been working tonight?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Since 5 this morning." He did the arithmetic. "That's 21 hours, she said. "Yes, I know." He made her stay. Not as a command. He wasn't entirely sure how he did it. Something in the way he moved to the refrigerator without asking. The way he began pulling things out with the particular purposeful calm that in retrospect might have been more disarming than any direct order. Elena watched him from the chair without speaking. He was not a man who cooked. He was aware of that. His kitchen existed primarily to be cleaned and occasionally occupied by a chef. He paid extremely well to handle the matter of his nutrition without requiring his involvement. But Adrian Moretti had grown up in a house where feeding people was an act of both love and obligation, and some things go so deep they outlast everything you build on top of them. He found eggs, bread, a block of cheese that was still good. He found a pan. Elena said, "You don't have to do that." "I'm aware." "Mr. Moretti." "Adrian." A pause. "What?" "My name is Adrian. You've worked in my home for a year and a half. You can use it." Another pause longer. "That doesn't seem appropriate." He cracked 2 eggs into the pan without looking at her. "Probably not. Use it anyway." She didn't. Not yet. But she stopped trying to leave. He put a plate in front of her. Scrambled eggs. 2 slices of toasted bread. He had found a jar of something apricot preserves that he had not known was in his refrigerator and set it beside the bread because it seemed like the kind of thing that belonged there. Elena looked at the plate. She looked at it for a moment too long. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "You said that." "I mean it." "I know you do." He sat down across from her again. "Eat." She picked up the fork. She ate. And he could see in the careful, controlled way she did it the way she kept her pace measured, when every instinct was probably telling her to eat quickly exactly how hungry she actually was. He waited until she had eaten half of it before he asked his next question. "Why are you here at 2 in the morning?" She kept her eyes on the plate. "I work late sometimes." "You work here 3 mornings a week. The cleaning schedule ends at noon." "I know." A beat. "I came back to finish something I missed this morning, in the study. I was going to leave before you." She stopped. "I didn't think you'd be back tonight." "I wasn't supposed to be." "I know. I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing for that." His voice came out with less edge than he intended. "That's not what I'm asking." She looked up. "Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking why a woman who works here 3 mornings a week is still in this building at 2 in the morning, looking like she hasn't slept properly in a month." Silence. Then, "Because I had nowhere else to be." It came out before she could stop it. He could see the moment she regretted it, the slight stiffening, the return of that careful expression she'd been wearing since he walked in, the one that kept everything she was actually feeling exactly 1 layer below visible. "What does that mean?" he said. "It means..." She set the fork down. "It means my day was very long and I needed somewhere to sit for a few minutes before the next thing, and I made a bad decision, and I'm sorry I was in your kitchen, and I will absolutely pay you back for the food." Elena. "I have some money saved I can..." Elena. Firmer. "I don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" The question landed between them like something dropped from a height. She seemed to realize immediately how it sounded. A woman alone in a powerful man's apartment at 2 in the morning, asking what he wanted from her. He watched the fear move across her face, quick, controlled but real, and he felt something shift in his chest. Some cold thing that recognized its own reflection and did not like what it saw. "A straight answer," he said. "That's all. What's happening?" She didn't answer that night. Not fully. She thanked him for the food, stood up, and asked in a voice that was steady with great effort whether she still had her job. He said yes. She said thank you. She left. And Adrian Moretti sat in his kitchen alone at 3 in the morning, looking at the empty plate across from him, thinking about a question he hadn't asked anyone in a very long time. Not what do they need from me, but what is actually happening to this person. He had 10 days until his wedding. The marriage to Isabella Bellucci was not something Adrian had chosen the way ordinary men choose things. It had been arranged not formally, not with contracts and signatures, but in the way that things are arranged in his world, which is through years of expectation, layered over years of necessity, until the outcome becomes simply assumed by everyone involved, including the 2 people it most directly concerns. He was 42 years old. Isabella was 34. She was beautiful, composed, and entirely capable of running a criminal enterprise with one hand while attending a charity gala with the other. Her father, Domenico Bellucci, was the most powerful man on the eastern seaboard outside of Adrian's own sphere of influence, and the merger of their 2 operations, through the very civilized machinery of a wedding, would produce something neither family could build alone. It was not a love match. Everyone knew it was not a love match, including Adrian had always assumed Isabella herself. The wedding was in 10 days. He should have been thinking about it constantly. He should have been reviewing security arrangements and guest lists and the 17 separate political calculations that would play out in the seating chart alone. Instead, he was thinking about a woman who had said without any apparent awareness of how extraordinary it was, "I had nowhere else to be." He had his assistant pull Elena's employment file the next morning. He told himself he was doing a background check. He told himself this was due diligence. He told himself that a woman found alone in his private residence at 2 in the morning warranted at minimum a review of her security clearance. He read the file for 40 minutes. Elena Carmen Vargas. Age 31. Born in Tucson, Arizona. One of 4 siblings. Father Roberto Vargas, 63. Retired construction foreman. Mother deceased 12 years prior. Elena had come to New York 7 years ago with a community college degree in business administration and evidently a willingness to work any job that paid. She held 3 positions simultaneously. Residential cleaning services, which was how she had come to work in Adrian's building 4 mornings a week. Table service at a restaurant in Midtown 4 nights a week. Linen and laundry service on weekend mornings. The math of her schedule was almost physically painful to look at. She was working something in the range of 80 to 90 hours a week across 3 employers and jobs that were each physically demanding in their own specific way. And at the bottom of the file, added as a note by the building's HR coordinator. Almost an afterthought. Employee has requested advance on salary twice in the past 4 months. Both requests declined per policy. She had asked for an advance, twice, and whoever was managing the paperwork had written it in the same tone you'd use to note a parking violation. He found her that afternoon. She was in the study, the room she'd mentioned. She was dusting the shelves along the east wall with the particular focused efficiency of someone who has learned to work as though they're invisible, because in most of the places they work, invisibility is both safer and more practical than being seen. She heard him come in and turned. The look on her face told him she had spent a portion of the previous night preparing for this conversation, and was not convinced it was going to go well. "Still here," she said. Not aggressive, just the instinctive armor of someone bracing for impact. "It's my apartment." "Fair enough." She turned back to the shelf. He sat down in the chair by the window, the reading chair, the one that faced the room, and he said, "I looked at your file." She kept dusting. "Okay. You've requested salary advances twice." The duster stopped moving, then started again. "That's between me and building HR. You work 3 jobs. A lot of people work 3 jobs. Elena." She turned around. There it was again, that look. The one that was trying to be neutral and wasn't quite succeeding, because underneath the careful composure was something that was very tired of holding everything together and was getting less good at hiding it. "Why?" he said. "Why what? Why 3 jobs? Why the advances? Why were you in my kitchen at 2 in the morning eating leftovers because—" He stopped himself, recalibrated. "What's happening with your family?" A long, loaded silence. "How do you know it's my family?" "Because you're not spending the money on yourself." She stared at him. He gestured a small motion. "Look at your hands, Elena. Look at your schedule. You're not running up debt. You're not supporting a habit. You're sending money somewhere, and the someone it's going to matters more to you than your own food or sleep." The duster was completely still now. She was very quiet. And then something happened that he had not expected and could not have predicted. Not because he didn't understand people, because understanding people was one of the fundamental skills of his survival. But because Elena Vargas had been so thoroughly armored since the moment he walked into that kitchen the previous night that he had not anticipated that the armor had a seam and that his last sentence would find it. She sat down on the edge of the desk behind her, not gracefully, not deliberately. She sat down the way a person sits down when their legs have simply decided they're done. And she looked at him with something that was not quite defeat and not quite trust, and was in fact something considerably more complicated than either. "My father is sick," she said. It came out in pieces. Roberto Vargas had been diagnosed 14 months ago. The name of the condition didn't matter as much as what it meant. A treatment existed, a real treatment with meaningful odds of success. But it was not covered by the insurance available to a retired construction worker in Arizona, and the gap between what insurance would pay and what the treatment actually cost was a number that, when Elena first heard it, had made her sit very still for a long time in the waiting room of a hospital she'd driven 400 miles to reach. She had done the math. She had revised the math. She had revised it again. She had taken every job she could find. She had stopped spending money on anything that wasn't strictly necessary. She had moved into a shared apartment in Queens with 4 other women sleeping in a room the size of a large closet because the rent was low enough to make a difference. And she was still after 14 months of this short. "How short?" Adrian asked. She named a number. He kept his expression neutral. For Elena Vargas, the number was staggering, the accumulated result of 14 months of impossible effort that had still not been enough. For Adrian Moretti, it was approximately what he spent on a single dinner for 12. He did not say that. "Why didn't you ask for help?" he said instead. She looked at him like the question was almost funny. "From who?" "From." He caught himself. "There are organizations, assistance programs. There are—" "I've applied to all of them," she said flatly. I've filled out every form. I've been on every waiting list. The programs that exist don't cover this kind of treatment, or they have caps that are a fraction of what's needed, or there's a waiting period that my father doesn't have the luxury of." She paused. "I'm not being dramatic when I say I've tried everything. I've tried everything." He believed her. That was what struck him most. Not the facts of it, not even the magnitude of what she was carrying, but the tone of her voice when she said it. That was not a woman performing desperation. That was a woman who had been fighting for over a year and had stopped expecting anyone to be surprised by the difficulty of it. "And you haven't asked anyone for help," he said. "Directly. Anyone who actually has the money." She looked at him steadily. "No." "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because the people I know who have that kind of money are people like you." It landed. He waited. "And people like you," she continued very quietly, "don't give gifts. You make investments. You give help and then you come back for it. Maybe not right away, maybe not obviously, but eventually everything has a cost, and I am not going to put my father's recovery in debt to someone who will one day want something I'm not willing to give." The room was very quiet. Adrian sat with that for a moment. "That's a very specific assumption," he said. "It's experience," she said. "And I am not—" Her voice broke just slightly, just enough for him to hear. "I am not criticizing you. I don't know you. I know what you are. I know what you do. And I am sure there are 100 reasons why you are the way you are, and most of them are probably real. But my father is dying by inches in a hospital in Arizona, and I am not going to let anyone else have a claim on his life or mine. Not for any amount of money." She was looking directly at him. She was not defiant exactly. She was something harder than defiant. She was certain. Adrian Moretti had been in rooms with presidents, with cartel leaders, with men who had decided to end other men's lives and had explained this decision without raising their voices. He had been looked at with fear, with respect, with the particular calculating regard that powerful people give each other when they're deciding how much danger the other person represents. He had never been looked at quite like this. Like she saw him perfectly and had decided on that basis to be honest. It was the most unsettling thing he could remember feeling in a very long time. "Thank you for telling me," he said. She stood up, smoothed her uniform, picked up the duster. She was putting the armor back on piece by piece, and he watched her do it with something that was almost not quite, but almost grief. "I'd like to keep my job," she said, "if that's still possible." "I already told you last night that it was." "I know. I wanted to make sure nothing I said today changed that." "It didn't." She nodded. "Okay." And then quietly, "I wasn't trying to make you feel guilty about the kitchen, about any of it. I needed somewhere to sit for a few minutes, and I made a bad call and I'm sorry." She walked to the door. "Elena?" She stopped. He had not planned what he was about to say. He became aware of this only as he was saying it, and he said it anyway, because something in the room had shifted past the point where measured responses felt true. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," he said. She was very still in the doorway. "Everyone does it alone," she said. "That's just how it goes." She left. Adrian stayed in the chair by the window for a long time after that. The city was loud outside. It was always loud. He had learned to work inside the noise of it, to let it become background, the constant ambient evidence that the world was moving, and he was required to move with it. He had a meeting in 2 hours. He had calls to make, agreements to finalize. The 10 days between now and his wedding were densely scheduled with the particular kind of work that a major realignment of power requires when it's being executed through the mechanism of a public ceremony. He sat in the chair. He thought about a woman who had worked 80 hours a week for 14 months and still been short. He thought about, people like you don't give gifts. They create debts. I thought about his own father, who had built the first piece of this empire with his hands, and a philosophy that had shaped everything Adrian had become, and who had also in his private hours, in the moments when the empire was not watching, been a man who fed people when they were hungry, who said that a man's worth was measured not in what he commanded, but in what he protected. He thought, when did I stop being that person? He thought, was I ever that person? Then he picked up his phone and made a call that had nothing to do with his wedding or his alliances or the careful political machinery of his world. He called the best medical facility on the eastern seaboard. Not through intermediaries, not through the careful anonymous channels he typically used when he wanted no fingerprints on a transaction. He called, directly identified himself, and asked to speak to the director of their treatment center. The call lasted 22 minutes. He made 3 additional calls after that. He did not tell Elena. He did not intend to tell Elena because he understood with a clarity that surprised him that if he told her, she would refuse it. She had said as much. She had been explicit. She was not willing to be in debt to him or anyone like him, and she meant it in a way that was not negotiable. So he arranged it differently. I was aware this was a form of deception. He was aware that she would have objections if she knew. He found for the first time in a long time that he did not care about being technically correct. He cared about her father getting better. He cared in a way that was frankly inconvenient, given everything else happening in his life about Elena Vargas, not having to sit on his kitchen floor eating leftovers at 2 in the morning, because she was too proud and too principled and too exhausted to ask for what she needed. He saw her 2 days later. She came in on her regular morning schedule, and she worked, and she was polite, and she was exactly as she always was, efficient, quiet, present in a way that took up no unnecessary space. He watched her for a while from his office doorway. She was doing something in the kitchen, reorganizing a lower cabinet. He thought something she'd been meaning to get to. She had her phone on the counter playing something low, some radio station he didn't recognize. She was humming faintly, not aware of him. She looked tired. She always looked tired now that he was actually looking. He thought about what she'd said, everyone does it alone. That's just how it goes. I thought that shouldn't be true. That has never been true for anyone I've ever cared about. He had not thought of caring about someone in quite that way, as a category, as a thing he was capable of, in a very long time. He went back into his office, but he left the door open. 4 days before his wedding, he received a call from Marco. The foundation came through, Marco said, because Marco was one of 2 people who knew. For the Vargas case. The notification went to the family in Arizona this morning. Treatment is scheduled to begin in 12 days. Adrian sat with that for a moment. Thank you, he said. Boss. A pause. She's not going to know it was you. No. Another pause. Is that the way you want it? He thought about that question longer than it deserved. It's the way it needs to be, he said. He ended the call. He looked at the wedding invitation on his desk, the formal printed version, the one the calligrapher had produced at significant expense on heavy cream stock. Adrian Moretti and Isabella Bellucci. 10 days, which was now 4. He sat very still. He thought about a woman who had said, I see you. She hadn't said that. Not yet. That was later, or it was a thing he was composing in his mind, a thing he was building out of the material of her honesty and her dignity, and the particular way she looked at him when she was deciding whether to trust him. She hadn't said it, but he could already feel the shape of it. He looked at the invitation for a very long time. Then he set it face down on the desk. He found her in the hallway that evening. She was leaving coat on bag over her shoulder, the particular velocity of a woman who has a shift starting somewhere else in 40 minutes and needs to catch a specific train. Elena, she stopped. I need to tell you something, he said. She turned, that careful look, that quiet, still attention. Your father is going to receive treatment, he said. Through a medical foundation. They're going to contact your family, they may have already. The treatment starts in 12 days. She stared at him. What? She said. Very quietly. The Harmon Medical Foundation. They fund treatments for... I know what they fund. Her voice was strange. I applied to them. 11 months ago. The waiting list was... She stopped. The waiting list was years long. They told me years. Sometimes circumstances change, he said. The silence stretched. He watched her understand. He watched her put it together. The timing. The specificity. The fact that he had looked at her file. The fact that he knew about her father at all. The fact that they were standing here having this conversation. "You did this," she said. "The foundation. You did this." It was not a question. Her voice was very controlled. "Why?" "Because your father deserved to get better. That's not—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "That's not a reason. That's not a reason you do this for a stranger, for someone who cleans your floor. You're not a stranger. I work for you. That's different from being a stranger." She was very still. He could see her working through it, not the emotion, though, that was there visible at the edges of her composure, but the calculation. The ledger she had been keeping. The careful accounting of what this meant and what it would cost. "What do you want back?" she said. It was blunt. It was almost cold. And it was the most honest thing she could have asked. He met her eyes. "Nothing," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Searching. Measuring. "You have to want something," she said. "Elena, I have more money than I can meaningfully spend. I have more power than most people will encounter in their lifetimes. I have a wedding in 4 days that is going to restructure the balance of influence on the entire East Coast." He stopped. "Let that sit. I don't need anything from you. I never did." She was quiet for so long that he thought she might simply leave without responding. Then she said very quietly, "Then why?" He thought about it. He tried to find the honest answer, the one that lived beneath the layers of rationalization and strategy, and the comfortable distance of doing good through anonymous channels. "Because I watched you sit on my kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, he said, trying not to cry. "And I thought about how long you must have been fighting, and I thought someone should have helped her a long time ago." Elena's composure broke. Not catastrophically, not publicly, just in one small specific place, the way a seam opens when the pressure is finally more than the stitching can hold. She pressed her hand over her mouth, looked at the ceiling. 1 breath. 2. Then, "Okay. Okay. Okay." She looked back at him. Her eyes were wet, but steady. "I'm not going to argue with you. My father needs this, and I'm not going to argue with you." A pause. "Thank you. You don't owe me anything for it." "I know," she said, "but I'm saying it anyway." She walked to the elevator. He watched her go. Just before the doors closed, she looked back at him. Something in her expression he couldn't quite name. Not gratitude exactly, or not only gratitude. Something more like recognition. Like she was seeing him for the first time, and wasn't sure what to do with what she found. The doors closed. Adrian Moretti stood alone in his hallway. He had 4 days until his wedding. He had just done something for a woman who cleaned his floors. He had done it because it was right, and because she needed it, and because somewhere inside the architecture of who he had made himself into the man his father had been first, was still there, still present, still capable of recognizing what mattered. And he stood in his own hallway, and he was quiet, and he felt something move through him that was almost entirely unfamiliar. Something that was, if he was being honest, and he was trying lately to be honest, something very close to peace. He walked back to his office. He turned the wedding invitation face up. He looked at it for a long time. Then he picked up the phone. Not to call Marco, not to call his lawyers. He called his own number, his private line, the one he used when he needed to think out loud without anyone hearing. It rang. He sat in the silence of his own apartment, in the faint smell of cleaning products and apricot preserves, and he listened to it ring. And for the first time in a very long time, Adrian Moretti was not sure what he was going to do next. He was not sure at all. But it did not, for reasons he could not entirely explain, feel like a bad thing. The phone call Adrian didn't make that night sat in his chest like a stone for the next 24 hours. I went through the motions. He took his meetings. He reviewed the final security arrangements for the wedding reception. He shook hands and signed documents and gave the right answers at the right moments, because 42 years of discipline does not evaporate overnight, not even when something underneath it has begun to shift. But his mind kept returning to the same place. Not to Alina exactly. Not to her face or her voice, or the particular way she had looked at him when the elevator doors were closing. He kept returning to what she had said, to a single sentence that had wedged itself into him like a splinter he couldn't locate and therefore couldn't remove. People like you don't give gifts. They create debts. He had heard things like that before. He had heard worse. People said all kinds of things about him, and most of it was accurate, and he had made peace with accuracy a long time ago. But Elena hadn't said it as an accusation. She had said it as a fact, as something she had learned from experience, from a lifetime of watching how power actually operates when it thinks no one respectable is paying attention. She wasn't wrong. That was the part that stayed. She wasn't wrong, and he knew she wasn't wrong. And the question that had been following him through every meeting and every handshake and every careful calculation of the past 36 hours was a simple one. And it was this: when did that become true of him? When did he stop being a man who helped people because they needed it and become a man who helped people because they could be useful? He sat with that question in the back of every room he walked into. He sat with it in the car on the way to Isabella's family estate for the pre-wedding dinner on the third-to-last night before the ceremony. He sat with it very quietly behind his public face while Domenico Bellucci poured wine and made toasts and watched Adrian the way a chess player watches a piece he controls and is pleased with. Isabella found him on the terrace after dinner. She was wearing something dark and expensive and entirely correct for the occasion, which was itself entirely correct for who Isabella was, a woman who had been trained from childhood to be correct in all the visible ways. She was striking. She was sharp. She had a mind that Adrian respected even when it was working against him, which it occasionally did. She stood beside him at the railing and looked at the gardens below and said without preamble, "You're somewhere else tonight." "Long week," he said. "You've had long weeks before." She turned to look at him. "This is different." He said nothing. "Adrian." Her voice was careful. Not hurt. Isabella was too controlled for public hurt. But something underneath the control that was looking for an honest answer. 3 days. I know. Do you want to tell me what's happening? He looked at her. He thought about all the things he could say that would be technically true and functionally evasive, and he thought about what Elena had done to his appetite for that particular kind of conversation. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this," he said. The silence that followed was very long. "For the marriage," he said. "Not for I'm not questioning your Isabella. Stop." She said it quietly. No drama. Just a woman who had seen this coming and had chosen until now not to name it out loud. "Don't explain it wrong. I don't need you to protect my feelings." He turned to face her. "Are you," he said, "the right person for this?" She held his gaze. And then, for just a moment, something happened in Isabella Bellucci's carefully constructed public face. Something slipped, some small private thing surfaced, and Adrian saw a woman who was also in her own entirely different way doing what was expected of her and not what she wanted. "That's a complicated question," she said. "I know. My father. I know." A long pause. She looked back at the gardens. "I don't hate you, Adrian," she said. "I want you to know that, whatever happens. I don't hate you either." Good. A very small, very dry sound that might almost have been a laugh. "That's a solid foundation." He said, "I'm sorry." She shook her head very slightly. "Don't apologize. Just be sure." She went back inside. Adrian stood on the terrace alone for a long time, listening to the sound of an expensive dinner continuing without him, and thought about being sure. I was back in the city by midnight. He didn't go home. He drove, which he rarely did himself, through the streets of a city that had been his for 15 years. He drove through the neighborhoods that he controlled, and the ones that bordered his territory, and the ones that were openly contested. He drove past buildings that bore his family name, and buildings that didn't, but should have by any honest accounting. He drove past a restaurant in Midtown. There was a window, tables visible through the glass. The end of night slow down the hour when the serious dinner crowd has gone, and the staff is beginning to move with the particular efficiency of people who want to finish and go home. He saw her through the window before he'd fully registered that this was the restaurant Elena worked at. The information was in her file, and apparently his brain had mapped the address without telling him. She was clearing a table near the back. She had her hair up and her uniform on, and she was moving quickly because it was late, and He knew this. He knew her schedule. Now she had another shift beginning in approximately 4 hours. He pulled over. He sat in the car. He didn't go in. I didn't have a reason to go in. He didn't have anything to say that he hadn't already said. He had helped her father. She had thanked him. They were in the formal sense employer and employee, with a professional distance that was appropriate and clear, and that he had already significantly complicated by cooking her eggs at 3 in the morning. He sat in the car. He watched her carry a tray of glasses toward the back of the restaurant. He watched her stop at another table, smile at the customers remaining there. Answer a question with the particular patience of someone who has been answering questions for 9 hours and has trained themselves not to let the exhaustion show. He watched, and he thought, she is going to do this again tomorrow, and the day after. She is going to do this until she physically cannot anymore, because that is who she is, because she made a decision about what mattered, and she has been executing that decision with everything she has, and it has been killing her slowly, and she did it anyway. He thought, when did I stop being someone who does things just because they matter? He pulled away from the curb. He went home. But he didn't sleep. 2 days before the wedding, everything changed. Not because of something Adrian did. Not because of something Elena said. It changed because of a phone call he received at 7:15 in the morning from a number he recognized immediately as belonging to Carlo Benedetti, one of his inner circle, one of the 3 men Adrian trusted with information that could end him. We have a problem, Carlo said. Define problem. The kind that involves the Bellucci family, a set of financial records that should not exist, and a man named Raymond Cho. Adrian was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. My office. 1 hour. He was there in 40 minutes. Carlo laid it out on the table. Physical documents. The kind of thing that nobody bothered with anymore because it was inconvenient and archaic, and therefore paradoxically, sometimes the safest way to handle information that you didn't want anywhere near a server. Raymond Cho was a mid-level financial manager in one of Adrian's legitimate businesses, a real estate development company that was in point of fact actually primarily a real estate development company, one of the cleaner parts of his portfolio. Cho had been there for 3 years. He had been reviewed. He had been vetted. He had been as far as Adrian's people could determine exactly what he appeared to be. What he had actually been for the past 18 months was a set of eyes and ears for Domenico Bellucci. He was feeding them information, Carlo said. Financials, transaction timelines, the real numbers, not the reported ones. What did they want with it? Adrian said, though he already knew. He just needed to hear it spoken. Leverage. Carlo's voice was flat. The marriage Bellucci didn't want a partnership boss. He wanted a takeover. He's been building a picture of your operation for 18 months with the intention of using it after the wedding to renegotiate the terms. From a position where he had information you didn't know he had. The room was very quiet. Adrian looked at the documents. I thought about Domenico Bellucci pouring wine 3 nights ago. Making toasts. Watching Adrian the way a chess player watches a piece he controls. A piece. He had been the piece. How long have you known? He asked Carlo. I found the connection 4 days ago. I needed 48 hours to verify. You waited 48 hours. I needed to be certain before I brought it to you. I wasn't going to give you a half-built case. That was true. That was, in fact, exactly how Carlo operated, and it was why Adrian had trusted him for 12 years. Who else knows? Adrian said. You and me. Keep it that way. He stood. For now. He spent 6 hours with the documents. He read everything. He traced the information flows, the timing, the specific data points that Cho had selected, which told him something about what Bellucci was most interested in, which told him something about where Bellucci intended to apply pressure first. It was meticulous. It was thorough. It was the work of a man who had spent a long time planning this very carefully. And it was if Adrian was honest, something he might have done himself in Bellucci's position. Not the deception necessarily. There were things Adrian did not do, regardless of the strategic benefit, but the patience of it. The long view. The willingness to wait and build and position before moving. He understood it. That was almost the worst part. He understood exactly how it had happened, and why it had worked as long as it had. Because the assumptions Bellucci was operating on that, Adrian wanted this alliance badly enough to be blind to its costs that he would not look carefully at what he was walking into. Those assumptions had been reasonable. They had been reasonable 3 weeks ago. Something had changed. He sat with the documents, and he thought about Elena on his kitchen floor, and Isabella on the terrace saying, "Just be sure." And he thought about his father, who had built something from nothing with his hands, and a philosophy, and he thought about what that philosophy actually was, not the mythology of it, but the real thing underneath. You protect the people who depend on you. Everything else is negotiable. He had stopped living by that. He had stopped living by it so gradually that he hadn't noticed it happening. He had replaced the actual thing with a performance of it. The right posture, the right words, the right controlled projection of someone who commanded loyalty because he deserved it. But somewhere along the way, he had let the real version of it atrophy, the version that was inconvenient and unstrategic, and sometimes required you to act without a clear advantage. Elena had not asked him for anything. That was the thing that had cracked him open. Not what she said, not what she needed, but the fact that she had needed something and had refused to ask him for it, because she understood correctly that in his world being given something created an obligation, and she would not put her father under that obligation, no matter what it cost her. She had seen him clearly. She had seen what he had become clearly enough to protect herself from it. And the question that had been following him for 3 days now sharpened into something he could actually hold. Is this who I want to be? Is this the man I have built? And am I willing to live the rest of my life as this man? He picked up his phone. He called his lawyer. He told no one else before he did it. Not Marco. Not Carlo. Not anyone in his family or his organization or his world. He called his lawyer, and he said he needed a conversation about withdrawing from a contractual engagement. And his lawyer, who had been his lawyer for 14 years and had a remarkable capacity for processing unexpected information without apparent alarm, said he would be there within the hour. He was there in 45 minutes. They talked for 2 hours. The withdrawal was possible. There was no formal contract. These things were never put in contracts in his world. But there were implications, and his lawyer laid them out with the thoroughness of a man who understood that his job in moments like this was to make sure his client understood exactly what he was choosing. Business consequences. Significant. The alliance would not simply dissolve, it would become an active antagonism. Bellucci would be publicly insulted. He would respond. The response would be structural and financial, and would likely include attempts to destabilize several of Adrian's operations. "I know," Adrian said. "You know what he's been doing," his lawyer said. "It was not a question. I found out this morning." A pause. "Does he know that you know?" "Not yet." His lawyer was quiet for a moment. "How do you want to play it?" Adrian thought about it. "I want to play it honestly," he said. His lawyer looked at him over the papers for a long moment. "That's unusual," he said, not unkindly. "I know," Adrian said. "Do it anyway." He called Domenico Bellucci himself. No intermediaries. No lawyers on the line. No carefully orchestrated confrontation with documentation and witnesses and the full weight of everything Adrian could deploy when he wanted to demonstrate what he was capable of. Just a phone call between 2 men on a Tuesday morning, 2 days before what had been planned as a wedding. Bellucci answered on the second ring. His voice had the particular smooth warmth of a man who has spent his entire life successfully performing warmth. "Adrian, I was just thinking about you." "I know what you've been building," Adrian said. "I know about Cho. I know about the financial records. I know what you plan to do with them after the ceremony." A silence. A very carefully controlled, very brief silence. "That's a serious accusation," Bellucci said. "It's not an accusation. I have the documentation. I'm not calling to threaten you with it." He paused. I'm calling to tell you that the wedding isn't happening. Another silence. Longer this time. The warmth was gone. You understand what you're doing, Bellucci said. Yes. You understand what I'll do. Yes. Adrian's voice was completely even. I'm not canceling because I'm afraid of you. I'm canceling because this isn't a marriage. It never was. It was a transaction you intended to weaponize, and I'm not interested in being part of that. And what about your business interests, your alliances? What about everything you lose when I'll handle it, Adrian said, as I always have. You sound very certain for a man who's about to lose. Domenico. His voice changed, not louder, just cleaner. Stripped down to the actual thing underneath all the politeness. You put someone inside my organization to gather evidence against me. You were going to use my own wife to compromise me. I am going to give you one professional courtesy, which is this phone call, and then I am going to deal with everything that follows on my own terms. A pause. We're done. He ended the call. He set the phone on his desk. He sat very still. And then, for just a moment, in the private silence of his own office with nobody watching, Adrian Moretti exhaled. Not with relief exactly. The road ahead was complicated and would be costly and would require everything he had. He was not naive about that. But with something that was almost simple. He had chosen. For the first time in a very long time, he had chosen without calculating the advantage. Elena was in his apartment that afternoon. Regular schedule. She didn't know any of what had happened. She came in with her cleaning supplies and her pulled-back hair and her particular systematic efficiency. And Adrian was standing in his kitchen when she arrived, and she stopped for a fraction of a second when she saw him, and then kept moving because this was her job, and she was professional, and whatever complicated thing existed between them had not changed the basic fact that she worked here. I'll be done by noon, she said. That's fine, he said. She moved past him. Elena. She stopped. I canceled the wedding. She turned. He watched the information reach her, watched her process it the way she processed most things quickly, with that controlled caution of someone who has learned not to react before they understand. The wedding, she said. To Isabella Bellucci. Yes. When? This morning. She looked at him. A long look. Not the careful, guarded assessment she usually gave him, but something more direct. Something that was trying to understand something. Why are you telling me? She said. Because you deserve to know. I'm your maid, Adrian. I know what you are, he said. I'm telling you anyway. She was very still. Is this because of me? It's because of a lot of things. But is part of it because of me? He held her gaze. Yes. She pressed her lips together, looked at the counter, then back at him. That's too heavy, she said quietly. That's too much for me to. I can't be the reason You're not the reason. You're the thing that made me see clearly enough to find the actual reason. He took a step toward her, then stopped. There's a difference. Is there? Yes, there is. She thought about that. He's going to come after you, she said. Bellucci. Probably. You know that. I've been handling dangerous people for 20 years. I'll handle this. It's different when it's personal. Everything is different when it's personal. He paused. That's not always a weakness. She looked at him. He looked back. And in the space between them, in the particular charged silence of two people standing on the edge of something they can't quite name, yet something shifted. Something small and real, and entirely unlike anything Adrian was used to navigating. Not a transaction, not a negotiation, not anything that had an advantage attached to it. Something considerably more inconvenient. Something he had not felt in so long that he'd half convinced himself he wasn't capable of it anymore. She broke the look first, turned back to her work. I'll be done by noon, she said again. Her voice was not steady. Okay, he said. He walked back to his office. He sat down. He thought, she's afraid. Then, so am I. Then, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. The news broke publicly by the end of the day. Cancellation of a high-profile alliance in his world did not stay private for long. Information moved through those networks, the way it always moved, fast, distorted, and with the particular narrative spin that whoever released it first wanted to establish. Bellucci's people got to it first. By evening, the version circulating was that Adrian Moretti had cold feet, that he had panicked, that he had humiliated one of the most powerful families in organized crime on the eastern seaboard, because he was, depending on which source you consulted, unwell, compromised, or simply no longer capable of making the hard decisions his position required. None of it mentioned a maid. Not yet. But Marco came to him at 9 that evening with an expression Adrian had learned to read over 11 years, the expression of a man who has information that the person he works for is not going to enjoy. Bellucci's been talking to his people, Marco said. He's painting a picture. He's saying you've become unreliable, that your judgment is compromised. I expected that. He's specifically saying there's a woman involved. Marco's voice was carefully neutral. He doesn't have a name yet, but he's asking around. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Who knows about Elena? He said. You, me, and whoever processed the Medical Foundation documentation. 3 people. Make it 2. Remove yourself from the paper trail on the foundation. Boss, I mean as a protection measure. If Bellucci is building a case that I'm compromised, I don't want you associated with anything that looks like I'm operating sentimentally. He looked at Marco directly. You understand what I'm saying? Marco looked at him for a moment. I understand, but you should know something. Tell me. She came in this afternoon. Marco's voice was careful. Elena, I saw her in the hallway when I arrived. She doesn't know anything about Bellucci looking for a name. But I want you to understand what's at risk if he finds out she exists. Adrian understood immediately, and the thing that moved through him when he understood it was not the cold strategic calculation he would have applied to any other variable in any other situation. It was fear, clean, unambiguous personal fear, not for himself. What's she working tonight? He said. Midtown restaurant, until 2. He was on his feet before Marco finished the sentence. He had a car waiting outside the restaurant at 1:30. He told himself it was a precaution. He told himself he was simply ensuring that a person connected, however peripherally, to his affairs was not vulnerable while an active provocation was unfolding. He told himself this was standard operational management. He sat in the car and watched the restaurant window and knew he was lying to himself. She came out at 2:15, slightly later than usual, pulling her coat on as she pushed through the door, her bag over one shoulder. She looked tired the way she always looked at this hour, the deep bone-level tired that didn't change with a good night's sleep anymore. She saw the car. She stopped. He got out. She stared at him. What are you doing here? Getting in the car, he said. Come on, Adrian. Bellucci is looking for a reason, he said. He doesn't have your name, but he's looking. I'm not going to leave you walking to a subway station at 2 in the morning while an angry man with significant resources is trying to find anything he can use against me. She stared at him. You're serious, she said. Completely. A long pause. She looked at the car. She looked at him. She looked at the street, the late-night quiet of it, and did the kind of rapid private calculation that he was becoming familiar with, the one where she was measuring the actual risk against the cost of accepting help from him. I'll take the ride, she said. But you're not coming up. I wasn't planning to. And you're going to tell me everything, about Bellucci, about what's actually happening. Yes. She got in the car. He got in beside her. Marco pulled into traffic. For a moment they were both quiet in the back of the car, in the particular silence of 2 people who have agreed to be honest with each other and are about to find out what that actually costs. She turned to him. Tell me, she said. He did. He told her about the intercepted financial information, about Raymond Cho, about what Bellucci had been building and what he had planned to do with it after the ceremony. He told her clearly and without softening it, because she had asked for the truth, and she was the kind of person who could handle the truth. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a while. Then, he was going to own you, she said. Through Isabella. Through the information he gathered. The marriage would have been the mechanism, not the point. And you didn't know. Not until 2 days ago. She thought about that. Would you have gone through with it if you hadn't found out? I was honest. I don't know. Something was already changing. Before I knew about the documentation. She didn't ask what the something was, but he could see that she knew. What does he do now? She said. He applies pressure. He destabilizes what he can. He makes it known that I'm an unreliable partner. He tries to pick up the pieces of my alliances that are shaky enough to move. And you? I rebuild, differently. He paused. Better. Alone. He looked at her. Less alone than I was, he said. If certain things become possible. She held his gaze. She didn't answer that. Not directly, not in words. But she didn't look away either. And Adrian thought enough. That's enough for now. The car moved through the city. The lights slid past the windows. 2 people in the back seat of an armored car. Neither of them saying what they were actually thinking. Both of them fully aware that something had begun that could not be easily stopped. When they reached her building, she got out. She stood at the door for a moment. Thank you, she said, for telling me. You deserve to know what you're connected to, even indirectly. Adrian. She looked at him. Her voice was quiet, and it was the most direct she had been with him since the kitchen that first night. And it was the thing he thought about later, after she had gone inside, after Marco had driven him home, after he had sat alone in his apartment, in the silence of a life that was in the process of becoming something entirely different from what it had been. She said, "Be careful, not for the business, for you." The car door was still open. He was looking at her. Why? He asked. She tilted her head very slightly, and the look on her face was one he was going to remember for a long time. Not soft, not romantic, just clear. Like someone who has looked at a thing carefully and decided to say what they actually see. Because I think there's more worth saving in there than you know, she said. She went inside. The door closed. Marco said nothing. Adrian said nothing. They drove in silence through the city, through the night, through the beginnings of a war that Adrian had chosen, and a future that was not yet written. And the most feared man on the East Coast sat in the back of his car in the dark, and for the first time in 20 years, he was not thinking about his position, or his alliances, or the 17 calculated steps between now and safety. He was thinking about a woman who had just told him he was worth saving, and he was thinking that he wanted very badly to believe her. The call came at 6 in the morning. Adrian was already awake. He had not slept well, not because of fear, not because of regret, but because his mind had been doing the thing it did when a major decision had been made, and the consequences were beginning to arrange themselves in real time. He was cataloging, mapping, running the calculations on what the next 72 hours would look like now that Domenico Bellucci had a full night to process his humiliation and begin responding to it. The number on his screen was one he recognized immediately. Vincent Mara. One of the 3 men who sat at the outer edge of Adrian's council, not inner circle, but close enough to matter. Old enough in the business to have navigated 3 major power shifts on the East Coast. Respected by everyone, owned by no one. Or so Adrian had believed. Vincent, he said, I'm going to say this once, and I'm going to say it straight. Vincent's voice was flat, stripped of all the warmth it usually carried. Bellucci called me last night. He made me an offer. I told him I needed time to think. Adrian was very still. And I'm calling you instead of calling him back. Make of that what you will. A pause. But Adrian, you need to understand what you're walking into. He's not just angry, he's organized. He spent the whole night on the phone. By my count, he's already spoken to 4 of your outer ring partners and at least 2 of your suppliers. How many are considering it? A silence that told him the answer before Vincent said it. More than you'd want. Adrian walked to the window. Outside, the city was doing what it always did, moving indifferent, enormous, alive with the ordinary machinery of people who had no idea that the invisible architecture they lived inside was currently being contested. What's his play? Adrian said. Specifically. He's not trying to destroy you. He's trying to shrink you. Cut your supply lines, peel away your peripheral alliances, make you small enough that coming back to the table starts looking like the reasonable option. Coming back to the table. A renegotiated arrangement, one where he holds more cards. He wants me to come crawling back. I want you to come back. The crawling is optional but preferred. Another pause. He also mentioned a name. He doesn't have a full picture yet, but he's been asking around about a woman. He doesn't have her identity, but he's building toward it. Adrian's grip on the phone tightened by a fraction. "Thank you, Vincent," he said. "I'll remember this call." "Make sure whatever you're doing is worth it," Vincent said. "I've known you for 15 years. I've never seen you move like this. Make sure she's worth it." He ended the call before Adrian could respond. Adrian called Marco before he had set the phone down. "Elena's scheduled today," he said the moment Marco picked up. "She comes in at 8, cleaning shift. I need her here. And I need 2 of your people in the lobby when she arrives, and I need them there without making it look like protection. Do you understand me?" "I understand." A beat. "Boss, how close is Bellucci to finding her?" "Close enough that I'm not taking chances." "Okay." Marco's voice shifted into the particular efficient calm of a man moving into operational mode. "Consider it done." She arrived at 8:03. She had her bag over one shoulder and her hair up, and the expression of someone starting a long day who has not yet had enough coffee. She did not look like a woman who knew she was being protected. She did not look like a woman who had spent her night thinking about a man sitting in the back of a car, watching her walk through a door. She looked like Elena, quietly, stubbornly herself. He met her in the foyer. She took one look at his face and said, "What happened?" He told her, quickly, directly, without softening the edges. Bellucci's calls. Vincent's warning. The fact that someone was building toward her name. She listened. He watched her process it the way she processed everything rapidly, with that quality of complete attention that felt rare in people who were not used to having the luxury of partial focus. When he finished, she didn't panic. She didn't demand to leave, or insist she could handle herself, or do any of the things he might have expected. She said, "Who's Vincent Mara?" He blinked. He's one of my outer council." "Why?" "Because he called you instead of calling Bellucci back. That means something. How long has he been in your orbit?" 15 years. "And in 15 years, has he ever chosen you over money?" Adrian thought about it. "Yes, twice." "Then he's not just a contact. He's a real ally." She held his gaze. "You have more of those than you think. You've just been operating like you have to do everything alone." He looked at her. She was standing in his foyer in her cleaning uniform, telling him how to manage an active threat from one of the most dangerous men on the East Coast. And the thing was, she wasn't wrong. "You need to move first," she said, "before he finishes making his calls. You need to get to your people today, not tomorrow, not in a strategic way personally. Pick up the phone and talk to them like they're people, not assets." "That's not how this works." "I know. That's why he's already winning." She shifted her bag on her shoulder. "Do you trust Carlo?" "With my life." "Then call Carlo, call Vincent back, call every real person in your circle, and tell them the truth, not the managed version, not the version that makes you look strong, the real one." She paused. "People stay loyal to honesty. They leave when they think they're being managed." "Where did you learn this?" he said. She almost smiled. "I've been watching powerful people for 7 years. You learn things when you're invisible." He spent the next 6 hours on the phone. He did it exactly as Elena said. He called personally, he spoke directly, and he told the truth, that he had discovered Bellucci's play, that he had ended the alliance because he refused to be positioned as leverage, and that whatever came next, he intended to handle on his own terms, and he wanted to know where people stood. Some of them hedged. He expected that. Some of them didn't answer. He noted those names. But more than he had anticipated, more than the cold strategic calculus of his world, should have allowed more of them, said, "We're with you." Carlo came to his office at 2 in the afternoon. He looked at Adrian with something that was not quite surprise, but was adjacent to it. "3 of the 4 Bellucci approached this morning have already called me," Carlo said. "They're staying. One of them called Bellucci back and told him the conversation was over. Which one? Fortunato. Carlo watched his face. Yeah, even Fortunato. Adrian let out a breath. Fortunato was the one person he would have bet against. How? He said. Apparently you called him at 11:30 and were, in his words, a real person for the first time in years. Carlo paused. I don't know exactly what you said, but whatever it was, it worked. Adrian thought about Elena in his foyer. People stay loyal to honesty. And the suppliers, he said. Two are waiting to see which way this breaks. One pulled out entirely. I have alternatives for the one we lost. Carlo set his folder on the desk. We're not as exposed as Bellucci hoped we'd be. Not yet. No, not yet. Carlo's voice was careful. He's not done making calls. I know. Adrian looked at the folder. What else? He found a lead on the woman. Adrian's attention sharpened. How detailed? Not a name. Not yet. But he knows she's connected to your residence. He knows she works there. Carlo met his eyes. He's working outward from the building staff. The cleaning service has access to personnel records. Yes. Adrian was already reaching for his phone. He went to Elena directly. She was in the study, the same room where she had told him about her father, the room that had become, without either of them officially designating it, the room where things were said that mattered. She looked at him when he came in and understood from his face that the information had moved. He's getting close to my name, she said. It was not a question. Yes, he's working through the building's cleaning service records. He looked at her steadily. I need to move you. Move me. Your address, your work schedule. I need to know you're somewhere he can't use. She was quiet for a moment. You want to put me somewhere safe? Yes. Like a resource you're protecting. The word landed with an edge she hadn't intended, or maybe she had intended it. He wasn't sure. He held her gaze. Like a person I don't want to get hurt because of a decision I made, he said. There's a difference. Is there? She crossed her arms. Not defensively, the gesture of someone thinking hard. Adrian, and if I disappear from my life right now, I lose 2 jobs. I lose my apartment, my roommates. I'll cover the rent, the jobs. I don't want you to cover the rent, Elena. His voice was very quiet. I know you don't. I understand why. But this is not a favor with a cost attached. This is me trying to protect someone who ended up in the middle of my situation through no fault of their own. He paused. You sat on my kitchen floor. That's the full extent of your crime here. You sat on my kitchen floor and ate leftovers, and you do not deserve to become a target because of it. She looked at him. A long, searching look. Okay, she said. Okay. But I pick where I go. And I tell my roommates the cover story myself. And... She held up a hand when he started to respond. I talk to my family. My father's in treatment now, and my brother and sisters don't know what's happening here, and I will not have them blindsided. Agreed. All of it. She nodded, turned back to what she'd been doing, then stopped. Adrian. Yeah. Your father. What was he like? The question came from nowhere and landed at the center of everything. Hal was quiet for a moment. Why? Because you make decisions like someone who was taught real values by someone who actually had them. And then you made yourself into something else. She turned to look at him. I want to know which one came first. He sat down on the edge of the desk. He didn't answer immediately. He thought about his father, the real memory, not the mythology. A man with big hands and an absolute commitment to the idea that how you treated people when it cost you something was the only meaningful measure of who you were. He was a man who would feed anyone who came to his door, Adrian said quietly. It didn't matter who. Didn't matter what they'd done. If you were hungry, you ate. He paused. He built something real, but the thing around it, the protection it required, that changed things. And by the time I inherited it, the protection had become the whole story. And the feeding people part got buried. But not gone, she said. He looked at her. Not gone, he said. She held his gaze for just a moment. Then she went back to work. He sat on the edge of the desk and did not move for a while, because something about that conversation had reached the part of him that the last 3 days had been slowly excavating, and it needed a moment. By 4 in the afternoon, Bellucci had her name. Adrian received the confirmation from a source inside the cleaning service company, a loyalty that cost him a significant sum of money and was worth every cent. The source sent him a single text. He has it. Vargas. He has the address. Adrian was moving before he finished reading it. He called Marco. He called the car. He called Elena's number and she picked up on the second ring and he said, "We're moving now. Get your bag. I'm 3 minutes out." She didn't argue. She didn't ask questions. She said okay, and the line went quiet. He found her outside her building when he arrived. Not waiting nervously, not panicked, but standing on the sidewalk with her bag and her coat, and the composed, slightly too still expression of someone managing fear with very precise effort. She got in the car without a word. Marco drove. "He has my name," she said. It wasn't a question. "And your address. He got it about 20 minutes ago." She absorbed that. "My father," she said. Her voice was controlled, but he could hear the thing underneath it. The specific fear of a person who has been carrying one fragile thing through a very difficult journey and has just been told the journey got harder. "If Bellucci knows my name, he knows I have family in Arizona. He could—" "I've already made calls," Adrian said. "Your family has protection. It's already in place." She looked at him. "When?" she said. 30 minutes ago. When I got the first indicator he was close." He held her gaze. Your father's facility has 2 of my people outside. Your brother's address has coverage. I should have done it earlier. I didn't, and I'm sorry." A beat. "You protected my family," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Before you called me. I called you 30 seconds later. But you did them first." He didn't answer because the answer was yes, and she already knew it. She turned and looked out the window. He watched her profile in the moving light of the city, the particular set of her jaw that meant she was holding something and processing something that was larger than what was showing on the surface. "Where are you taking me?" she said. "Somewhere Bellucci won't look for 36 hours. That's all we need." Why 36 hours? Because by then, what he's trying to build will have already collapsed. He said it with a certainty he had not entirely earned yet, but was committed to earning. "I need 36 hours to finish what I started this morning." She turned back to look at him. "What did you start this morning?" "Rebuilding from something real," he said, "instead of something strategic." She looked at him for a long moment. "And is it working?" she said. "Better than I expected." He paused. "Because of advice I received." She knew what he meant. He watched her try not to let that affect her, and he watched her not quite succeed. "Don't give me credit for your decisions," she said. "I'm giving you credit for what you actually did, which is see something I'd stopped seeing." "Adrian, you asked me once what I wanted back, for helping your father." He looked at her. "I don't want anything back, but I want you to understand that the way you talked to me from the very beginning, like I was a person with something real inside him that did something. I can't explain it better than that." The car was quiet. Marco's eyes remained professionally on the road. Elena was very still beside him. "I talked to you like that because you were there," she said finally, "and because I was too tired to perform." "I know," he said. "That was the point." He put her in a townhouse he owned under a corporate name, clean, comfortable, nowhere near any of his usual properties, connected to nothing that Bellucci's people would think to trace. He'd bought it 3 years ago as part of a legitimate real estate transaction, and never used it for anything except storage. She walked through it with the expression of someone being practical about something that was, if she let herself look at it directly, fairly overwhelming. "It's too nice," she said. "It's empty. I'm not sacrificing anything." "Adrian." "Elena." She turned. The look on her face was somewhere between exasperated and something warmer that she was working to keep in the exasperated category. "This is very much not what I imagined when I asked Mr. Moretti to please not fire me," she said. The sentence surprised a sound out of him. Not quite a laugh, he wasn't sure he still knew how to do that in a natural way, but something in that direction. Something that felt rusty and real. She noticed it. The corner of her mouth moved. "There it is," she said quietly. "What?" "The person." She looked at him. "You should let him out more often." He looked back at her, and the moment stretched, one of those moments that both people know is happening, and neither person quite knows what to do with, the moments that are simultaneously incredibly simple and completely terrifying. Then his phone rang. It was Carlo. "He moved faster than we thought," Carlo said. "He's not waiting for the supply chains. He's going straight at your reputation. He's calling a general meeting open to anyone in our circle, tonight. He's framing it as a stability conversation." "Where?" "The Meridian Club, 9 o'clock. Adrian checked the time. He had 4 hours. "Who's invited?" "Everyone. That's the point. He wants an audience." "Then I'll give him one." Adrian was already calculating. "Get me Carlo Fortunato. Get me Vincent Mara. Get me anyone who confirmed loyalty this morning. I want them at the Meridian Club by 8:45. "You're going to walk into his meeting." "I'm going to walk into a room full of people I've done business with for 20 years, and I'm going to remind them why they trusted me." A pause. "It's what he's trying to do. I'm just going to do it better." He ended the call. He looked at Elena. She had heard enough. She said, "Go. You'll be safe here. Marco stays in this building." "I don't need—" "Marco stays," he said. "Not hard, just clear." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. He moved toward the door. "Adrian." He stopped. She crossed the room, stopped about 2 feet from him. Her eyes were very direct. "Don't perform for them," she said. "Don't give them the managed version. Give them you." "You keep saying that, because you keep almost doing it." She tilted her head. "The man who cooked eggs at 3 in the morning. The man who paid for a stranger's father's medical treatment and didn't take credit. That man is more convincing than anything you could plan." She paused. "Trust that." He looked at her. I wanted to say something. He had the words, or some approximation of them, assembled in the vicinity of his chest, where they had been slowly building for days. But the timing was wrong, and the situation was loud, and Elena had been through enough tonight without him adding a declaration to it. So he said, "Thank you." She said, "Come back." Simple. Flat. Like a statement of preference rather than anything more complicated. But he carried it with him out the door and into the car and through the dark streets toward a room full of people who were about to decide what kind of man he actually was. The Meridian Club was at near capacity by 9. Bellucci arrived at 8:55. He did it deliberately, the orchestrated entrance of a man who has planned every visible element of this moment. He wore a suit that communicated everything it was supposed to communicate. He was flanked by 2 men who served the same purpose. He moved through the room with the warmth of someone who is very angry and has decided to weaponize his own charm. Adrian arrived at 9:02. He came in alone. No Marco. No Carlo at his side. No protective formation. Just Adrian Moretti walking into a room full of people who knew exactly what was happening and were waiting to see how it played out. The room went quiet in a specific way, the quiet of an audience that has just realized the show is actually going to happen. Bellucci saw him. Something moved across his face, surprise, and then the rapid recalibration of a man adjusting his plan in real time. Adrian walked to the center of the room. He did not look at Bellucci. He looked at the room, at the specific faces of people he had worked with for years, some of whom had called him this morning with loyalty, and some of whom had hedged, and some of whom were here because they genuinely didn't know what they thought yet. He spoke to all of them. "You know what's happening," he said. His voice carried. He didn't perform it, he just spoke the way Elena had told him to, like a person. Domenico Bellucci spent 18 months building a case against me, with the intention of using it after a wedding that would have given him structural access to everything I've built. I found out 2 days ago. I ended the alliance. He paused. That's the real version. I'm sure you've heard others. The room was very still. Bellucci said from across it, "You ended a generational alliance because you panicked." "No," Adrian said. "I ended it because I discovered what it actually was." "You ended it for a woman." "I ended it because I found out I was being maneuvered." His voice didn't change. "The woman is separate. Is she?" Bellucci's voice had taken on an edge, the careful edge of someone who is about to deploy a weapon he has been holding in reserve. "Because my understanding is that the woman in question is a maid, your maid, and that in the space of 2 weeks you have cancelled a dynasty-level alliance, compromised your organization's security posture, and begun making decisions based on the feelings of someone who cleans your floors." He let that sit for a beat. That is not the action of a man in control of his operation. Adrian looked at him. He thought about what Elena had said in the car on his kitchen floor in every honest moment since this started. He thought about his father feeding people who came to the door. He thought about the question she had asked, which one came first. "She's not a maid," Adrian said. "She's a woman who worked 3 jobs for 14 months to save her father's life and never asked anyone for help because she understood correctly that people with power usually want something in return." He paused. "She sat in my kitchen at 2 in the morning eating leftovers because she was too proud and too principled to steal anything. And I watched her on a security camera, and I thought, this is what integrity actually looks like. Not strategy, not management, not a calculated show of loyalty, the real thing." The room was completely quiet. "And I realized," he continued, "that I had built something that looked like strength and wasn't. That I had made myself into something that controlled people instead of leading them. That the most honest interaction I'd had in years was with a woman that nobody in my world bothered to see." He looked at Bellucci. "You spent 18 months collecting evidence of who I was, but you didn't account for the possibility that I might stop being that person." Bellucci was very still. "This is sentiment," he said. "You are standing in front of your entire operation and telling them you changed because of a maid. I'm telling them I changed because I found out I'd become someone my father would not recognize." Adrian held his gaze. "And I'm telling them that the man Bellucci spent 18 months gathering leverage against is not the man standing here tonight." He looked back at the room. "You can work with the old version, the managed one, the strategic one, the one who ran everything at a distance and called it control. Or you can work with this. Both are legitimate choices, but I'm not going back." He stopped talking. He waited. The room was silent for 4 full seconds. Then Vincent Mara said from somewhere to his left, in the tone of a man who has made a decision, "I'm with you, Adrian." Then Fortunato. Then one by one others. Not all of them. He had not expected all of them, but enough, significantly more than enough, to make what was happening in that room unmistakably clear. Bellucci stood very still. He was a man who had built a plan meticulously over 18 months and had just watched it fail in approximately 4 minutes. He looked at Adrian. His voice was low and controlled. "This isn't over." "I know," Adrian said. "But tonight it's done." He walked out. He was in the car outside when his phone buzzed. A text from a number he had saved as a contact 3 days ago when he had started making calls he hadn't planned on making. How did it go? He looked at the message for a moment. He typed back, "Better than I deserved." 3 seconds passed. Then, "That's not how it works. You did it. Own it." He sat with that for a moment. He typed, "How's the place? Weird but fine. Marco made terrible coffee and wouldn't admit it. I'll tell him. Don't." He tried hard. Adrian looked at his phone. The city moved outside the window. Everything had changed in the last 3 days. His operation, his alliances, his reputation, the entire shape of his public life, and the person he most wanted to talk to about it was a woman sitting in a townhouse texting him about bad coffee. He typed, "I want to tell you something when I get back." A longer pause this time. Then, "Okay, just that. One word." But he read in it everything she hadn't said. The careful openness of someone who was afraid and choosing honesty anyway, which was, he had come to understand exactly who Elena Vargas was. He told Marco to drive. He held his phone in his hand and watched the city pass. I thought 2 days ago I was 10 days from a wedding that was going to hand me to someone who saw me as a piece on a board. And now I'm driving back to tell a woman I've known for a year and a half. A woman I never actually saw until she sat down on my kitchen floor, that she has changed something fundamental in me, and I need her to know that, and I'm not attaching a cost to it, because she was right from the beginning. The moment you attach a cost to honesty, it stops being honesty. I thought my father would have liked her. He thought actually my father would have loved her. He thought she sees people clearly, she saw me clearly, and she didn't run. The car moved through the night, through the city, through the wreckage and the rebuilding toward something Adrian Moretti had not allowed himself to want for a very long time. Something real. He got back to the townhouse at 11:40. Marco let him in without a word, and then made himself scarce with the particular professional discretion of a man who understood that some conversations required the room to be empty. Elena was in the kitchen. She had made tea, not for herself, apparently, because her cup was full and untouched on the counter beside her. She was sitting on a stool with her phone face down in front of her, and when Adrian walked in, she looked up with the expression of someone who has been waiting and has been trying very hard not to look like they were waiting. "You're in one piece," she said. "I'm in one piece." "How bad was it?" He sat down across from her. He thought about the room, the silence when he started talking, Bellucci's face when it became clear that the play wasn't landing the way he'd planned, Vincent Mara's voice cutting through the quiet like something solid. "It was bad," he said, "and then it wasn't." "Tell me," he told her. "All of it. Not the strategic version, not the version that made him look controlled and competent, the real version." The moment he walked into the room alone and felt every eye calculate the meaning of that. The way Bellucci had positioned himself, had deployed the thing about Elena specifically, because he knew it was the most destabilizing card in his hand. The 4 seconds of silence after Adrian stopped talking, that had felt like 4 hours. She listened. The way she always listened, completely without performing attention, just genuinely present in the information. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He used me," she said. Not upset, just naming it accurately. "He tried to." "Did it work in the room, I mean? Before the others came in on your side, did it land?" He thought about it honestly. For a moment, you could feel it. The idea that I'd lost my judgment, that I was operating on feeling instead of calculation. He paused. And the uncomfortable part is that it wasn't entirely wrong. She looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means you did change my thinking. That part is true. He just got the direction of it wrong." He held her gaze. "He thought it made me weaker. It made me cleaner." She absorbed that. "What did you say about me, in the room?" He told her what he'd said. He told her about the kitchen, what he'd described the 2 in the morning, and the leftovers, and the integrity he'd seen in someone nobody had bothered to look at. He watched her face as he said it, the careful stillness of someone receiving something they don't quite know what to do with. When he finished, her eyes were bright. She didn't cry. She pressed her lips together and looked at the counter and breathed for a moment. Then, "You said that in a room full of those people?" "Yes." "About me specifically?" "Yes." "Adrian." Her voice was very quiet. "Do you understand what that does publicly? They all know my name now. They know what I look like in that story. They know I'm connected to you." "I know. That's not something you can undo." "I'm not trying to undo it." She looked at him. The careful look, the one that was measuring something real. "You said you wanted to tell me something," she said. "When you texted. Is this it, or is there something else?" He looked back at her. "There's something else," he said. He said it plainly because Elena was the person you said things plainly to. Ornament would have been a kind of insult. He said, "I don't know what this is, between us. I'm aware it started in the strangest possible way, and I'm aware the distance between our lives has been significant, And I'm aware that I have spent the last 2 weeks doing things that have complicated both of our situations in ways that neither of us fully planned for. He paused. But I know that when I was sitting in that room tonight, the person I was thinking about was you. Not strategically. Not as a motivation or a symbol or an argument. Just you, the specific person. And I thought if I get through this, I want to go tell her. Elena was very still. Tell me what, she said. That whatever you think I am, the version you decided to protect yourself from when you wouldn't take my money. I understand why you thought that. I was that person. I had become exactly what you were protecting yourself from. He stopped, started again. But I don't want to be that person anymore. And I'm not asking you for anything. I'm not attaching a cost. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that you changed something real in me. And because I would like if you're willing to figure out what this is, slowly, without a transaction attached to it. The kitchen was very quiet. She looked at him for a long time. He let her. I clean people's apartments, she said finally. I wait tables at night. My father is in a medical facility in Arizona that you paid for through a foundation that I now know you funded. My entire life right now is sitting in a townhouse I don't own because a man I work for is in a war with another dangerous man and my name got caught in the middle. I know. That's not a foundation, Adrian. That's a crisis. I know that too. So what are you actually asking? I'm asking if when the crisis is over, you want to know each other better. He kept his voice even. That's all. No obligations, no costs. Just if you want to. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that he had begun to build himself a careful acceptance of a no that he would have respected completely. Then she said, ask me again when it's over. He looked at her. When your father is home, she said. When Bellucci is handled. When I'm back in my own life, and you're back in yours, and we can both see clearly what this looks like without a crisis around it. She held his gaze. Ask me then. Okay, he said. Okay. She picked up her tea. Finally drank some of it. Made a face. This is cold. I'll make more. You'll make more. I can boil water. Can you? Because the eggs were good. Something in him settled. Quietly. In the particular way that things settle when you've said the true thing and been heard by the right person, and the outcome for once isn't a loss. He got up and filled the kettle. 3 days later, Bellucci made his next move. It was not subtle, because Bellucci was past subtle. The Meridian Club had been a miscalculation, and he knew it, and men like Domenico Bellucci did not respond to miscalculations by becoming measured. They responded by escalating, because escalation was the only language that felt like control when control was slipping. He went after Adrian's construction contracts, 2 city-level development projects that bore Adrian's company name. Legitimate operations, real work buildings, going up with real materials and real labor, suddenly hit regulatory complications. Permits delayed. Inspections scheduled and rescheduled. Anonymous complaints filed with municipal offices about procedural violations that were technically possible to file and practically impossible to disprove without a lengthy review process. It was bureaucratic warfare. It was slow and grinding and expensive and designed to exhaust, rather than destroy, the kind of move that costs a man money and time and attention, while the person who initiated it maintains visible distance from it. Carlo brought him the news on a Thursday morning. It's Bellucci, Carlo said. We can't prove it from the outside, but the timing and the specific permits targeted, these are the projects he had the most detailed financial intelligence on. Through Cho Saj, Adrian said. Through Cho. Adrian looked at the documents. He thought about the money, the delays, the workers who would be affected, the people downstream of his decisions, who had no idea that their livelihoods were being used as pressure points in a conflict between 2 powerful men. He thought about his father saying, "You protect the people who depend on you." What do we need to fix this legitimately? He said. Carlo looked at him. Legitimately. Yes, through proper channels. What do we actually need? Carlo laid it out. Lawyers, documentation, A specific contact inside the Municipal Review Board who owed Adrian a favor that had not yet been called in. A public statement from the development company addressing the complaints directly and transparently. "Do it all," Adrian said. "Every legitimate piece. Don't touch anything that isn't clean." Carlo was quiet for a moment. "That's going to take longer than... I know how long it takes. Do it anyway." Carlo nodded slowly. "Okay." He paused at the door. "You know he's going to see that approach as weakness. He's going to see it as weakness right up until it works," Adrian said. "And then he's going to have nothing left to call it." He called Elena that evening. She was back in Queens. She had returned to her apartment 2 days after the Meridian Club, when the immediate threat had been assessed and downgraded. She had gone back to her jobs. She had been practical about it in the particular way that Elena was practical about everything. She assessed the actual risk, determined it was manageable, and went back to her life. He had wanted to argue. He had not argued because arguing would have been the old version of him, the version that controlled people instead of respecting them. She picked up and said, "I've been reading about the permit issue." He blinked. "How did you—" "It's in the business section. The development company is public enough that the regulatory complaints made local coverage." A pause. "Are you okay?" "I'm handling it." "I know you're handling it. I asked if you're okay." The distinction landed. "I'm okay," he said. And then, because she was Elena, "I'm tired. It's a different kind of tired than I'm used to. I'm used to being tired from moving fast. This is tired from holding a line." "Yeah," she said. "I know that kind." "I know you do." He paused. "How's your father?" Her voice shifted. It always shifted when the subject moved to her father. Something in it opened up, lost a layer of the careful professional composure. "He called me this morning. He said the treatment team they're encouraged. He said they used that word, encouraged." A breath. He sounded like himself, not the sick version, the him version. "Good," Adrian said, and meant it in the simple, unstrategic way he was relearning how to mean things. "He asked me how I paid for it," she said. "The treatment." Adrian was quiet. "The foundation paperwork was good," she said. "Very thorough, very convincing." A pause. "But my father spent 30 years in construction. He can read the fingerprints of someone who built something carefully." "What did he say?" "He said, 'Mija, whoever helped us make sure they know they did a good thing.'" Her voice was steady, but he could hear the weight in it. "So, they know. Tell him it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing. It was what it should have been." He struggled with it the way he was learning to struggle with receiving honesty instead of deflecting it. "It was the right thing, that's all." She was quiet for a moment. "My brother wants to meet you," she said. He hadn't expected that. "Your brother. Daniel, he's 27, he's very protective. He will absolutely try to assess your intentions in the most direct possible way, and I'm telling you in advance, so you're not caught off guard." A pause. "I told him you were a person I knew. He read between the lines immediately, because Daniel always reads between the lines." "What did you tell him exactly?" "I told him you were complicated, and that I was being careful, and that he should relax." Another pause. He didn't relax. Something moved in Adrian's chest. Something that was warm and very slightly terrifying. "When?" he said. "Slowly," she said. "Ask me when it's over. Remember." "I remember." "Okay." Her voice was softer now, the late evening version, the version he was starting to recognize as the one that came out when the armor had been off long enough to forget to put it back. "Get some sleep, Adrian." "You too." "I have a shift at 6. Elena." "Good night." She was gone. He sat with the phone in his hand and thought about a 27-year-old named Daniel in Arizona who read between lines and wanted to meet him, and he thought that was probably the most terrifying thing that had happened this week, which was saying something considerable. The twist came on a Friday. Not from Bellucci. From inside. Adrian was in a meeting with 3 of his senior operational managers, men he had worked with for years, men who had been through significant challenges alongside him, when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. He ignored it during the meeting. He read it afterward. "You should ask Carmine Sessa where he was the night Bellucci's people got Elena's name. Ask him who he talked to in the 48 hours before that. He's been playing both sides for 6 months. This is not from anyone you know. But it's true." He read it 3 times. Carmine Sessa had been with him for 9 years. He had been present in Adrian's organization through 2 major transitions, 3 territorial disputes, and the negotiation that had 18 months ago laid the groundwork for the Bellucci alliance that had just collapsed. He had been as far as Adrian had ever determined entirely reliable. He set the phone down. He thought about Elena's name reaching Bellucci, the speed of it, the specificity. He had assumed the cleaning service records. He had assumed a methodical external investigation. But if someone on the inside had simply handed over what they already knew? He called Carlo. "I need you to do something quietly," he said, "and I need it done today." Carlo came back in 4 hours. He came back with the particular expression he wore when the news was bad, and he had taken his time organizing it because he believed that information delivered in the right sequence was more useful than information delivered in a rush. He sat down. He laid out what he had found. Carmine Sessa had received 3 payments over the past 6 months from a corporate entity that Carlo's financial investigators had traced through 3 layers of incorporation to a holding company with known Bellucci connections. The payments were not large enough to be obvious. They were large enough to be meaningful. And the dates of the payments corresponded precisely with 3 moments when Bellucci had seemed to know things he shouldn't have known, including Carlo believed Elena's identity. "He told them," Adrian said. "Yes. He sat in my meetings and fed information for 6 months. Yeah." Carlo's voice was careful. "And there's one more thing. Tell me. The anonymous text you received. We traced the number prepaid, discarded, untraceable in the ordinary sense. But the text was sent from a location near Sessa's apartment." Carlo paused. Someone in his orbit knew what he was doing and decided to end it. "A conscience," Adrian said. "Or a self-preservation calculation." "Could be either." Adrian sat back. He thought about 9 years. The meetings, the handshakes, the shared history of navigating difficult situations. He thought about the particular betrayal of a man who had not been coerced. The payments showed willingness, showed deliberate choice. He thought about what the old version of himself would have done. The old version would have been swift and final, and would not have lost a night's sleep over the methodology. "Bring him in," Adrian said. "I want to talk to him myself." Carlo looked at him. And then we'll see." He met Carlo's eyes. "I'm not going to do what you're thinking, but I'm going to know why." Carmine came in the next morning. He came in the way a man comes in when he knows the meeting is about what he's done. Slightly too composed, slightly too prepared, the specific performance of someone who has rehearsed the story they intend to tell. He sat down. He looked at Adrian. And something happened in his face when he looked at Adrian, something that was not the rehearsed version. Something that was underneath the preparation, the face of a man who had spent 6 months doing something and living with what it meant. "You know," Carmine said. "Yes." A long silence. "Are you going to let me explain?" Carmine said. "That's why you're here." Carmine looked at the desk, at his own hands. He was a man in his mid-50s, with the kind of face that life in this world builds hard at the surface, much more complicated underneath. "My daughter," he said. Adrian waited. "She's 3 years ago she got involved with someone on the Bellucci side, not knowingly. By the time she understood who he was, she was..." He stopped. "She was in a situation. Bellucci knew about it. He came to me 18 months ago. He told me what he needed. He told me what would happen to her if I said no." The room was very quiet. Adrian looked at the man across from him. He thought about Elena saying, "People like you don't give gifts, they create debts." He thought about how precisely that described what Bellucci had done to Carmine Sessa, had found the one thing a man would protect at any cost, and had used it without hesitation. "Is she safe now?" Adrian said. Carmine looked up. The question had not been what he expected. Yes. She's out of that situation. She left him 8 months ago. She's in Chicago. A pause. She doesn't know what I did. Bellucci kept asking for information after she was safe. He had documentation, things that could still hurt her. Her connection to the man, some things that happened during that time that she wouldn't want known. Carmine's voice was flat with self-contempt. He had leverage, and I kept paying it. Adrian was quiet for a long time. He thought about what justice looked like in this situation. He thought about what his father would have done. He thought about the person he was trying to become slowly in the space that Elena's honesty had opened up, and whether that person had room in him for the complicated reality of a man who had done something genuinely damaging for reasons that were genuinely human. You gave him Elena's name, Adrian said. Specifically. Carmine closed his eyes. Yes, you knew what he'd do with it. I knew he was building pressure. I didn't know how close it was to becoming something worse. He looked at Adrian. When I heard he had her address and was moving on it, that's when I sent the text. I know it doesn't undo it, Adrian said. No, but it changed the outcome. He paused. She's safe. Her family is safe. Partly because of the warning. He looked at Carmine directly. What does Bellucci have on your daughter that's still usable? Carmine told him. It took about 10 minutes. Adrian listened to all of it. He asked 2 clarifying questions. He did not react to the content, not because it wasn't significant, but because reacting would have been about him. And this was about a young woman in Chicago who didn't know her father had spent a year and a half carrying the weight of her protection the only way he knew how. When Carmine finished, Adrian said, I can make it unusable. The documentation, the connection, I have people who can handle both. He paused. It takes time. Probably 6 weeks. Carmine stared at him. Why would you do that? He said. Not a question. More like a man trying to locate himself in a situation that had stopped matching his map. Because your daughter didn't do anything, Adrian said. And because Bellucci used her the same way he uses everything as a lever, and I'm tired of letting him operate that way unchallenged. He held Carmine's gaze. But you're done here. You understand that. Yes. You leave cleanly. You go take care of your daughter. You don't come back into my orbit. Carmine's jaw moved. I know I don't deserve. This isn't about what you deserve, Adrian said. This is about ending what Bellucci built, all of it, including the part he built with you. He stood. We're done. Carmine stood. He moved toward the door. At the door he stopped and he said without turning around in the voice of a man making the only payment he had left to make, She was right about you, the woman. Whatever she said you were becoming, she was right. He left. Adrian stood alone in his office for a moment. Then he sat down. Then he picked up his phone and called Elena. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Hey, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He paused. I wanted to hear your voice. A beat of silence. That's new, she said. I know. Is it good new or alarming new? I think good new. He paused. Someone said something to me today that made me think about what I'm building, what I want it to look like. What did they say? He told her. The version that didn't involve names or specifics, because those weren't his to share, but the shape of it. A man who had done something wrong for the right reasons. A daughter who didn't know the price her father had paid a corner of the world that Bellucci had infected with exactly the kind of debt and obligation machinery that Elena had described from the beginning. She listened. When he finished, she said quietly, Is his daughter going to be okay? Yes, I'm making sure of it. Good. A pause. You know that's the right call, right? Helping her. I know. Some people in your position wouldn't see that. Some people in my position would have handled the father very differently. Yes, she said. They would have. She was quiet for a moment. You're changing, Adrian. I want you to know I see it. He held the phone. She had said I see you. Not in those exact words. Not yet. But close enough that he felt it in the same place. Thank you, he said. Go finish the work, she said. I'll be here. He went back to Bellucci 3 days later. Not at a meeting, not with an audience, not with the full deployment of everything he had assembled. He called the man directly the same way he had called to cancel the wedding, and he laid out what he had. He had the documentation of Bellucci's financial surveillance through Cho. He had the payment records connecting Bellucci to Sessa's coercion. He had 3 witness accounts from people inside the Bellucci organization. People who had been watching, who had their own reasons for wanting this particular play to end that detailed the methodology precisely. "I'm not going to use any of this offensively," Adrian said. "I want you to understand that clearly. This is not a threat. This is a statement of position." He paused. "What you built over the past 18 months is finished. The leverage you had is gone. The people you turned are no longer in my circle. And I have documentation of your methods that I will absolutely deploy if you move against me, my operations, or anyone connected to me." He let that sit. "We're done, Domenico. Completely. No renegotiation, no future table. We're done." The silence on the other end lasted a long time. "You've changed," Bellucci said finally. His voice was stripped of the warmth. What was underneath it was the actual man, colder, harder, and genuinely surprised. "Yes," Adrian said. "It won't last." "You might be right," Adrian said. "But it's lasting right now, and right now is what I have." He ended the call. He sat for a moment. Then he texted Elena. "It's over. Most of it." She replied in 30 seconds. "Most of it. There are loose ends. There always are. But the main thing is done." A pause. "Ask me again," she wrote. He stared at the message. His heart did something specific. Something he recognized from a very long time ago, from before the Empire and the walls and the 42 years of becoming the person his world needed him to be. He typed, "Can I see you tonight?" A pause that lasted long enough to be felt. Then, yes. He put his phone down. He looked at his desk, at the documents and the files and the accumulated evidence of 3 weeks of war, and he thought about what Carlo had said at the beginning. Make sure she's worth it. He thought that was the wrong question. The right question was never whether she was worth it. The right question was whether he was. Whether the person he was becoming slowly, imperfectly, with significant amounts of damage along the way, was someone worth offering to a woman who had sat on his kitchen floor at 2 in the morning and chosen dignity over everything else available to her. He thought, "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." He got up. He got his coat. He went to find Elena. He drove to Queens himself. No Marco. No car with tinted windows and a professional at the wheel. Just Adrian Moretti in a vehicle he almost never operated personally. Navigating streets he knew by reputation rather than memory, following a GPS toward an address he had memorized from a file and never used until tonight. He parked outside her building at 8:17. He sat in the car for 2 full minutes. I was aware with the particular clarity that comes after prolonged crisis that he was nervous. Not the operational tension of a dangerous meeting or the cold focus of a high-stakes negotiation. Nervous the way a person is nervous when what's at stake is something they actually want and cannot strategize their way into receiving. He got out of the car. He rang the buzzer. Her voice came through the intercom almost immediately, which meant she had been listening for it. 3rd floor. Door on the left. The building was narrow, and the hallway smelled like someone had cooked something with garlic, and the elevator was the kind that required faith. He took the stairs. She was standing in the doorway when he reached the 3rd floor. Not waiting dramatically, just standing there. The door opened, still in the clothes she'd clearly worn through a shift and not changed out of, yet her hair half escaped from whatever it had been pinned into this morning. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You look terrible," she said. "I feel better than I look." "That's a low bar." She stepped back to let him in. The apartment was small and shared, and entirely Elena, not in the way that expensive things are. Someone not in the way that curated spaces announce a person's self-image, but in the way that a space looks when someone practical and private has lived in it for a while. Clean. Organized. A small desk in the corner of her room with a photograph. He noticed immediately, a family, a man who was clearly her father in the middle of it. Arm around a younger Elena, who looked about 17 and was laughing at something outside the frame. She caught him looking at it. "Arizona," she said. "Thanksgiving, before my mother died." "You look happy." "We were." She sat on the edge of the bed, which was the only available surface in the room that wasn't the desk chair. He took the chair. "We still are, mostly. We just had to learn to be happy differently." "What does that mean?" "It means the shape changed, and we changed with it." She looked at the photograph. "My father is the reason I understand what you're trying to do. He spent his whole life building something, not an empire, just a family, just a good enough life, and he did it by being exactly who he was. No gap between the public version and the private one." She paused. "When I met you, I thought, okay, this man has all the power in the world, and no version of himself that he actually trusts. You got that from the security camera footage of me standing in my kitchen. I got that from watching how you were with your staff, with Marco, with everyone around you." She met his eyes. "You controlled everything, including your own face. Nobody around you knew what you were actually thinking. That's not strength, that's armor. It kept me alive." "I know it did," she said. "I'm not criticizing it. I'm saying you built it for a reason, and it did the job, and now you're trying to figure out if you can live without it." She paused. "Can you?" He thought about the last 3 weeks. The phone calls he had made without scripts. The things he had said at the Meridian Club without calculation. The conversation with Carmine Sessa, where he had chosen to see a human being rather than a problem to be managed. The fact that he was sitting in a small bedroom in Queens because a woman had said yes and he had driven himself and he was nervous. "I'm trying," he said. "I know." She looked at him steadily. "That's why I said yes tonight." They talked for 2 hours. Not about Bellucci. Not about the organization or the documentation or the next steps in the cleanup that would take months to fully execute. Those things existed and would continue to exist, and both of them knew it. They talked about her father. About what Roberto Vargas had been like before the illness. "The hands, always the hands," she said. "He could fix anything with his hands, and he never made you feel stupid for not knowing how." And about the phone call that morning, when he had laughed at something her brother said. And it had been the real laugh, not the managed one he'd developed in the hospital. They talked about Adrian's father. Things Adrian hadn't said to anyone in years. The way the man had been in his private hours versus the way the world saw him. The specific contradiction of inheriting something that was built with one philosophy and discovering that sustaining it required becoming someone your builder wouldn't entirely recognize. "Did you ever tell him that?" Elena asked. "That you were worried about who you were becoming?" "No." "Why not?" Adrian thought about it. "Because he died before I understood it was happening." He paused. "By the time I saw it clearly, there was nobody left who would have cared enough to tell." Elena was quiet for a moment. "That's the loneliest thing you've said to me," she said. "Yeah." "Is it still true?" He looked at her. "Less than it was 3 weeks ago." She held his gaze. Then she said very quietly, "Ask me." I understood immediately. He felt it land in the center of his chest, simple and enormous, at the same time the way true things often are. "Can I know you better?" he said. "When the dust settles. When your father is home and you're back in your actual life, and I've finished becoming whoever I'm going to be after all of this." He paused. "Can I be someone you let in?" She took her time answering. He gave it to her. "Yes," she said, "with conditions." "Name them." "You don't manage me, ever. If you're scared or confused or angry, you tell me you don't perform calm." She met his eyes. "If something affects me, you tell me before it becomes a crisis. If you make a decision that involves my life, you make it with me, not for me." "Agreed." "And you let me have my life. My jobs, my apartment, my family, my way of doing things. I don't disappear into your world." "I wouldn't want you to." "Most people say that at the beginning." "I know." He held her gaze. "I'm going to say it again at the middle and the end. You can hold me to it." She studied him. "Okay," she said. It was the same word she had used that first night in his kitchen and in his hallway when he'd told her about her father's treatment, and in the townhouse when he'd said he wanted to tell her something. One small word that she deployed with precision that meant, "I've considered this carefully, and I'm choosing yes." I thought he would never get tired of hearing it. He left at 11. Not because he wanted to, but because she had a 6 o'clock shift, and he had enough respect for her life to not be the reason she ran on 4 hours of sleep. At her door, he stopped. She was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely, the posture of someone comfortable enough to be unself-conscious. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "About the foundation. About how it was set up." She looked at him. "The Harmon Foundation." "Yes. The one that coincidentally processed my father's case in 3 weeks when the wait list was 2 years." A beat. "Yes." "Adrian." Her voice was dry. "I'm a 31-year-old woman who has been surviving by paying very close attention to how things actually work. I knew within 48 hours. She tilted her head. "I just appreciated that you didn't make me have a conversation about it." He stared at her. "You knew. I strongly suspected, and then I confirmed it." She paused. "I was angry for about a day. Then I thought about the alternative, my father not getting treatment, and I decided to be grateful instead." A pause. "But I want you to know that I know. No gaps." "No gaps," he agreed. "Good." She uncrossed her arms. "Go home, Adrian. Get some sleep." He went. He drove back through the city at 11:15 at night with the windows down, which he never did because the night air was doing something that felt necessary. He thought about a woman who had known and chosen gratitude anyway. He thought about conditions and what it meant to be given them by someone who had every reason to give them and the integrity to mean them. He thought, "I have a lot of work to do, not on the organization, on himself." But for the first time in a very long time, the work felt like something worth doing. The weeks that followed were not simple. They were not the clean resolution that crises and stories are sometimes given, where the battle ends and the dust settles in a single graceful motion, and what remains is recognizable as peace. The real version was more complicated and more human. Bellucci retreated, but did not disappear. He was a man who understood that a direct confrontation had become unprofitable, and men like that pivot. They find different angles, apply pressure through different channels, wait for the moment when attention lapses. Adrian's organization spent 6 weeks in a state of heightened vigilance that was exhausting in the specific way that sustained alertness is exhausting. The way it takes something from you that doesn't fully come back. 3 of his outer circle partners drifted toward Bellucci's sphere quietly enough to maintain deniability. Adrian let them go. He made note of what they had chosen, and he filed it in the category of information that would matter eventually and required no action now. He did not pursue, did not threaten, did not deploy the old machinery of intimidation that would have been his instinct 18 months ago. Carlo watched this with an expression that moved over the weeks from skepticism to something approaching trust. "You're playing it long," Carlo said about a month in. "I'm playing it correctly," Adrian said, "which sometimes looks like long." "It's working," Carlo admitted. "Slowly, but it's working." And it was. Slowly. In the way that things built on real foundations build, not quickly, not dramatically, but solidly. The permit complications resolved through legitimate channels. 2 of the suppliers who had wavered came back. Vincent Mara remained a consistent and useful presence in a landscape that was still shifting. And inside his organization, something else was shifting that Adrian watched with more attention than he gave the external politics. People were talking to him differently, not about the work. The work had always generated conversation, but about other things, small things. A manager named Torres, who mentioned in passing that his wife had been ill and the insurance situation was complicated, and who seemed genuinely startled when Adrian asked follow-up questions, and then quietly ensured the situation was handled. A young driver on his security detail, who had ambitions about a different career, and who Adrian, having heard it mentioned once, remembered to ask about a month later. How was paying attention? He was paying the kind of attention that his father had paid, not strategic attention, not the vigilance of a man cataloging potential assets and liabilities. but the simple human attention of someone who recognized that the people around him were people. Marco noticed. Marco, who had worked for him for 11 years and had approximately 3,000 opportunities to form an opinion, noticed. I didn't say anything for a while. Then one morning in the car, without preamble, he said, "My daughter is applying to colleges." Adrian turned to look at him. "She wants to go to NYU, Marco said. "She's nervous about the application. She's smart, but she doesn't know how to talk about herself on paper. She's never been taught that." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Send me what she has so far." Marco kept his eyes on the road. "Yeah, I know people who are good at that. I'll make some calls." Marco was quiet for the length of a long traffic light. "Thank you," he said. It was not the thank you of an employee to an employer. It was something else. Something that recognized that the man in the back seat was attempting with visible effort and uneven results to become the kind of person who deserved it. Adrian received it without deflecting. That too was new. Roberto Vargas came home from the treatment facility on a Thursday in November. Elena called Adrian from the airport, not Arizona, but JFK, because her father had wanted to come to New York first, to see where his daughter had been building her life, to put a face to the city she'd disappeared into 7 years ago. "He landed 20 minutes ago," she said. Her voice had the particular quality it always had when she talked about her father, open in the way it wasn't about other things. "He looks, Adrian, he looks good. He looks like himself." "That's everything," Adrian said. "My brother is with him. And my sister Rosa." A pause. "Daniel already asked 3 questions about you." "What kind of questions?" "The kind a 27-year-old asks when he's trying to figure out if a man is worthy of his sister without being obvious about it." Her voice was dry. He was not subtle. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to ask you himself." A pause. "Is that okay?" He thought about a meeting with a 27-year-old who read between lines and was protective and entirely within his rights to be both of those things. "Yes," he said. "That's okay. Okay." He could hear noise in the background, arrivals terminal, the particular chaos of an airport reunion. "I have to go. They're coming through the doors." "Go." "Adrian." A pause. Just his name. But in the way she said it, with a warmth that was no longer guarded, that had been building across weeks of evenings and phone calls, and 2 people learning to be honest with each other in real time, it held everything she wasn't saying yet. "Go, go," he said again, gently. "Be with your family." She went. He sat for a moment after the call ended. I thought about a man he had never met, who had fixed things with his hands and raised a daughter who saw people clearly. He thought about what it meant that this man was alive and had gotten on a plane and was walking through an airport in New York, and that the chain of events connecting that fact to this moment ran through a security camera feed and a kitchen floor and a conversation about debts and gifts, and what it meant to be the kind of person who helps someone because they need it and not because of what it costs them. I thought my father would have called this a good day. He thought it is. He met Roberto Vargas on a Saturday. It was Elena's idea and her plan, which meant it happened at a diner in Queens, not a restaurant Adrian would have chosen, not anything that resembled his world. A booth in the corner. The kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that came in thick ceramic cups, and exactly the kind of unpretentious, unhurried atmosphere that Elena knew her father needed and her brother would respect. Daniel Vargas arrived first. He was 27 and compact, and had Elena's eyes and a handshake that communicated without hostility that he was paying close attention. He sat across from Adrian and said, "I did some research on you." "I'd be surprised if you hadn't," Adrian said. "The things I found were—" He paused, choosing. "Significant." "Yes. My sister is important to me. I know she is." Adrian held the young man's gaze directly. "She's important to me too. I understand I haven't earned the right to say that with any authority yet. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to pay attention over time." He paused. "You seem like a person who pays attention, so do that." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "She said you were complicated." "She's right. She also said you were trying." "Also right." Another long look. Then something shifted in Daniel's face. Not approval exactly, not yet, but the particular quality of a person who has received an honest answer and is adjusting their assessment accordingly. "Okay," he said. One word, delivered with the same precise weight his sister used it. Adrian almost smiled. Roberto came in 10 minutes later between Elena and Rosa, moving with the careful deliberateness of a man whose body was still recalibrating after months of treatment, but holding himself with a dignity that was entirely his own. He was shorter than Adrian had imagined from Elena's descriptions. He had big hands as advertised. He had a face that had been lived in thoroughly and still held warmth without effort. He looked at Adrian before Elena said anything. He extended his hand. Adrian shook it. Roberto said in accented English that was precise and unhurried, "My daughter tells me you're a man who does things the complicated way when the simple way would cause problems." "That's generous," Adrian said. "It's accurate." He held Adrian's hand for just a moment longer than a standard handshake. The look on his face was the look of a man who has seen enough of the world to be a reliable judge of another person and who is making a judgment. "She also tells me you helped us without wanting thanks." "I wanted her father to get better," Adrian said. "That's different from not wanting thanks." Roberto nodded slowly. "Good answer." He let go. A man who pretends he wants nothing usually wants everything. He moved toward the booth. "Sit. The coffee here is terrible, but we're going to drink it anyway." They sat. They drank terrible coffee. And over the next 2 hours in a corner booth in a diner in Queens, Adrian Moretti had the most ordinary and the most significant conversation he could remember having in 20 years about Roberto's work, about Elena's childhood, about Daniel's plans, about Rosa's recent move, about all the small accumulated facts of a family's life that have no strategic value whatsoever, and are for exactly that reason the most real things in the world. Elena watched him. He caught her watching twice. Both times she looked away quickly, but the second time before she looked away, she was smiling. Not the careful managed version, the real one. Walking out of the diner. 2 hours later, Roberto stopped beside Adrian on the sidewalk while the others moved ahead toward the car. He said, "She doesn't trust easily." "I know. She has learned to survive on her own because the alternative was worse." He looked at his daughter ahead on the sidewalk, laughing at something Daniel had said. "That's not a criticism of her. That's what life required of her. But it means what she gives when she gives it is real, not performance." "I know that too." Roberto looked at him. "Do you know what I'm asking you? You're asking me if I understand the weight of what's being offered and whether I intend to be worthy of it." A pause. Then a short, quiet sound. Something between satisfaction and approval. "My daughter said you were direct," Roberto said. "She taught me that," Adrian said. "Recently." Roberto looked at him for another moment. Then he nodded once, the conclusive nod of a man who has made a decision and is at peace with it. "Good," he said. He walked toward the car. Adrian stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Elena appeared beside him. "What did he say?" she asked. "He asked if I understood the weight of what's being offered." She was quiet for a beat. "What did you say?" "I said yes." He looked at her. "Do I?" She looked back at him. That direct look, the one that had started all of this, the one he had first seen across his kitchen island at 3 in the morning, when a woman who had nothing to gain from honesty had been honest anyway. "You're learning," she said. "Is that enough?" She tilted her head, one small motion. "For now," she said. "Ask me in a year." The winter came. The Bellucci situation did not resolve cleanly. It never would entirely, because men like Domenico Bellucci did not clean resolve. They evolved into new configurations of the same essential problem. But the immediate threat was contained, and the sustained pressure that had been characteristic of his early response gradually lost its momentum as it became clear that Adrian's rebuild was solid and getting more solid. The documentation Carlo had assembled sat in a secure location, available if needed, not deployed, because it hadn't needed to be. That restraint, the choice to hold the weapon, rather than use it, communicated something to the people watching. It communicated that Adrian Moretti was not operating from fear. That was in the end the most effective possible message. 3 months after the Meridian Club night, Vincent Mara said to Adrian over lunch, "I've watched you run this organization for 15 years. This is the first time I've believed you actually know why you're doing it." "What do you think I think I'm doing it for?" Adrian asked. Vincent was quiet for a moment. "For the people inside it. Not just the ones who are useful, the people." Adrian thought about Torres and the insurance situation, about Marco's daughter and her college application, which had gone well, about a file room full of records he had been slowly reviewing with new eyes, the eyes of someone asking, not what can this person do for me, but what does this person need? "Yeah," he said, "something like that." The twist that came in January was not from Bellucci. It came from Raymond Cho. Cho had been dismissed from the organization months earlier. Quietly, his departure managed with the professional discretion that prevented a public complication. He had understood what he was being given an exit rather than an ending, and he had taken it. Adrian had considered that chapter closed. But Cho reached out in January through a lawyer requesting a conversation. Adrian almost said no. He said yes because Elena, when he mentioned it, said, "Why did he do it? Do you actually know why?" He didn't. "Then find out," she said. "You made a decision about Carmine because you understood why. You can't do the same for Cho if you don't know." He met with Cho in a neutral location, a lawyer's conference room, nothing dramatic. Cho was 38 and looked like a man who had spent several months reviewing his own decisions extensively. He said, "I want to explain. I'm listening." It was a different explanation than Carmine's. There was no coercion, no daughter in a difficult situation, no leverage applied at a vulnerable moment. Cho had made a choice for money, and the money had been motivated by a debt, private financial. The kind of debt that accumulates when someone you love needs help, and you make a bad decision about where to get it from. His mother. Medical costs. A shortfall that had felt at the time impossible. Adrian listened to the full account without expression. When Cho finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You could have come to me," Adrian said. "Not as not the way it happened. But there were channels. People I had in place for exactly this kind of situation." Cho looked at him. "I didn't know that." "I know you didn't." Adrian absorbed that. "I didn't make it known. That's a failure on my part." Cho stared at him. That had also not been expected. "The debt is cleared," Adrian said. "Yes, long since." "And your mother?" "She's fine. She's been fine for over a year." Adrian nodded. He thought about the cost-benefit of the situation. He thought about what Elena would say if he described this conversation to her later, which he would, because that was what they did. Now they talked about things, the real things, without managing each other. She would ask, "What does he need now?" "What are you doing for work?" Adrian said. Cho blinked. I've been consulting. Financial analysis." "Are you any good at it?" "Yes." A pause. "I was good at it for you." "You were," Adrian said. "Until you weren't." He paused. "I'm not offering you your position back. I want to be clear about that. What happened had consequences, and they stand." He met Cho's eyes. "But I know people who need good financial analysis. Clean work. I can make an introduction." Cho was quiet for a long time. "Why?" he said. And Adrian said the thing that he would have been incapable of saying 18 months ago, the thing that had been slowly becoming true across the entire complicated arc of the past several months. "Because people make bad decisions when they're desperate and alone," he said. "And I spent a long time building a world where people felt like they had to be desperate and alone before they'd consider asking for help." He paused. "I'm trying to build something different. Starts with the small things." Cho looked at him. He looked like a man trying to locate himself in a story that had stopped going the direction he'd planned for. "Okay," he said. Elena heard the whole story that evening. She was at his apartment. She had started spending time there in a way that was gradual and natural and entirely unlike the careful professional distance of her first year and a half sitting at the kitchen island in the place where she had once been afraid to sit. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You're building it," she said. "Trying." "No, you're doing it. There's a difference." She looked at him. "You know what my father said to me after he met you?" "What?" "He said, that man has been carrying a very heavy version of himself for a very long time and he's finally setting it down." She paused. "He's good at seeing people." "He taught you that?" "He did." She was quiet for a moment. "Adrian." "Yeah. I'm not afraid of you anymore." He looked at her. "I was," she said. "Not physically. I was never afraid of you physically. I was afraid of what you represented. What men with that kind of power always eventually want." She held his gaze. "I'm not afraid of that anymore. Because I proved you wrong." "Because you proved yourself wrong," she said. "There's a difference. I didn't fix you. You saw something that needed fixing, and you fixed it." She paused. "I just happened to be the person you saw it through." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're more than that," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm saying you were the one who did the work." He thought about everything that had happened in the past several months. The phone calls made without scripts. The Meridian Club. Carmine and his daughter in Chicago. Roberto over terrible coffee. 100 small moments of choosing the real thing over the managed version. "I had a reason," he said. She held his gaze. "So did I." And there it was. The real answer to the question he had asked back in November, "Can I be someone you let in?" She had already been letting him in the way that Elena let people in, which was slowly and honestly and with conditions that she meant and that he was learning to meet. He reached across the island. She looked at his hand for a moment. Then she put hers over it. Simple. Unperformed. The most ordinary and enormous gesture available to two people who have chosen each other carefully. "Ask me the year question," she said. He looked at her. "It's been approximately 4 months." "Close enough." She almost smiled. "Ask me." I understood. He thought about all the ways he could say the thing he was going to say, and discarded all of them, except the plainest one, because Elena was the person you said things plainly to, and the plain version was always the truest. "Do you want to build something?" he said. "With me. Not in my world, not on my terms, something that belongs to both of us, something real." She looked at him. Some called him ruthless. Some called him changed. Some called him unpredictable in the particular way that made their calculations unreliable, which was itself a kind of power that operated differently from the old kind, but operated just as effectively. Bellucci had not vanished from the landscape, he had simply receded, as threats recede when they meet resistance that doesn't exhaust itself. Carlo ran the organization with a methodology that had changed in ways subtle enough to be deniable and real enough to be felt. Vincent Mara remained a consistent presence. Marco's daughter got into NYU and sent Adrian a thank you note that he kept inexplicably in the top drawer of his desk. Roberto Vargas came back to New York in the spring, healthy enough to walk without assistance, and he and Adrian had dinner at a restaurant that was neither a diner nor anything near Adrian's world, but somewhere in the reasonable middle, and Roberto told a story about a construction project from 30 years ago that had gone wrong in increasingly improbable ways. And Adrian laughed. Actually laughed, the real unpracticed version. And Roberto looked at his daughter across the table with an expression that said, yes, this one. Daniel stopped doing research on Adrian somewhere around month 6. He didn't announce this. He simply, one day, started talking to him the way you talk to a person instead of a question you're trying to answer. And Elena went back to work. Not the 3 jobs. Not the impossible 80-hour scaffolding of desperation, but work she chose in a field she was moving toward deliberately. She enrolled in evening classes at a school in Manhattan business administration, finishing what she'd started years ago before life rerouted her. She went 2 evenings a week and came back with the particular energized tiredness of someone doing something that matters. She did not move into Adrian's penthouse. She kept her apartment for months, and when she eventually did move, it was into something they had chosen together. Something that was neither his world nor her closet-sized room in Queens, but a real place that had enough room for both of their versions of themselves. She kept the photograph of her family at Thanksgiving. She put it on a shelf where it was visible. He put nothing on the shelf beside it for 2 weeks. Then he found something. A photograph from his own family. Decades old. His father in the middle of a group of people, arm around a younger version of the man who would eventually become the most feared person on the East Coast. His father was laughing. Fully. Without management. He put it on the shelf beside Elena's. She saw it one evening and stopped. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. "He looks like you," she said, "when you laugh." "I don't laugh that much. More than you used to." He thought about that. "Yeah," he said. "More than I used to." The city outside continued doing what cities do. Moving, indifferent, enormous, full of people, living their lives inside an invisible architecture. They walk through without knowing it exists. In one apartment in a building that bore no particular significance to anyone who passed it, a man who had spent 42 years building something everyone feared was learning slowly, and with full commitment, how to build something worth keeping instead. And beside him was a woman who had once sat on his kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, too proud to ask for help, and too principled to take what wasn't hers, who had looked at the most powerful man she had ever met and seen beneath everything he had made of himself. Something worth the trouble of telling the truth to. She had been right. He had been worth it. And they had both in the